A woman stood alone against a dying ranch, a greedy family, and a town that wanted her to fail. But when a stranger arrived to buy everything she had left, he discovered something no one expected: a warrior who would risk her life in a winter storm to prove that Iron Creek Ranch would never surrender. If you want to see how one decision changed everything, stay until the end, hit the like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Thomas Calloway died, the vultures started circling before his daughter could even close his eyes. Mara knelt beside her father's bed in the small wooden ranch house, her hand still gripping his cooling fingers when she heard the first wagon rolling up the dirt road. She didn't need to look through the window to know who it was. Her Uncle Raymond had probably been waiting at the town saloon, checking his pocket watch every hour, counting down the minutes until he could claim what he thought should have been his all along. She stood slowly, her knees stiff from kneeling on the hard floor, and walked to the front door. Through the warped glass, she could see Raymond climbing down from his wagon, his belly straining against his vest buttons, his face already arranged into what he probably thought looked like grief. Behind him came two more wagons, her cousin Marcus and his wife, her father's former business partner, a weasel named Pritchard, who'd been trying to buy sections of Iron Creek for years. Mara stepped onto this porch and waited. Raymond stopped at the bottom of the steps, removing his hat with theatrical slowness. "Mara, sweetheart, we came as soon as we heard. He died 20 minutes ago." Her voice came out flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. "How exactly did you hear?" Raymond's face flickered with something that might have been shame if he'd been capable of it. "Doc Henderson mentioned your father was failing. You thought you'd get here fast enough to watch him die so you could start dividing up his property before the body was cold." Marcus stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture that was probably meant to be soothing. "Now, Mara, that's not fair. We're family. We're here to help you through this difficult— Get off my land." The words came out quiet, but they landed like stones in still water. Raymond's theatrical grief vanished, replaced by the calculating hardness she'd seen in his eyes since childhood. "Your land? Mara, honey, you can't possibly think you're going to run this ranch by yourself. A woman alone, with the debts your father left behind, the banknotes, the failing wells and broken fences, and— I said get off my land." This time her voice carried across the yard, strong enough that the horses shifted nervously. Pritchard, who'd been hanging back near the wagons, took a step forward. "Miss Calloway, if you'd just listen to reason, I'm going to say this once." Mara walked down the steps until she stood eye to eye with her uncle. She was tall for a woman, built solid from years of ranch work, and she didn't miss the way Raymond took a half step backward. "My father built this ranch from nothing. He survived drought, disease, financial panic, and every snake who tried to take advantage of him. Including you, Raymond. He knew exactly what you were, what all of you are." She turned her gaze to each of them in turn. "You want to know what his last words were? He told me to hold this land, no matter what. No matter who came begging or threatening or offering what they claimed was help. He told me Iron Creek Ranch stays in Calloway hands, and that means my hands, because I'm the only Calloway who ever gave a damn about anything except money." Raymond's face was turning red. "You can't possibly manage this place alone. You're being emotional, not thinking clearly. Give yourself time to grieve, and then we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll get my father's rifle and we can settle this the way disputes get settled out here when the law's a 2-day ride away." She wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. Mara had been shooting since she was 8 years old, and her father had made sure she was better with a rifle than most men in the territory. Raymond's calculation was visible on his face, weighing whether she'd actually do it, whether he could call her bluff, whether the potential profit was worth the risk of getting shot. Marcus made the decision for him, grabbing Raymond's arm. "Come on, Pa. We'll come back when she's more reasonable." "I won't be more reasonable," Mara said to their backs as they climbed into the wagons. "I'll be less. Every day you wait, I'll be more dug in, more impossible to move. Tell everyone in town. Tell them Mara Calloway isn't going anywhere." She stood on the porch and watched them leave, the dust from their wagons hanging in the cold October air, long after they disappeared down the valley road. Only when she was certain they were truly gone did she allow herself to sit down on the top step, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her weight. The enormity of what she'd just promised crashed over her like a wave. Hold the ranch. Alone. With debts she couldn't even calculate yet, repairs she'd watched her father put off for years because there was never enough money, never enough time, never enough help. The north fence was falling down. The barn roof leaked in 3 places. The well on the east pasture had gone dry last summer, and they'd never fixed it. The cattle herd had dwindled to maybe 40 head, barely enough to make a profit even in a good year. And she was 35 years old, unmarried, with a reputation in town as Thomas Calloway's strange daughter, who preferred horses to people and could outwork most men, but had never learned to be soft or charming or any of the things women were supposed to be. But she'd made a promise to her father, and Mara Calloway didn't break promises. She buried Thomas 3 days later in the small cemetery at the edge of the property, next to her mother who died giving birth to a stillborn son when Mara was 12. The reverend from town came out to say words over the grave, along with maybe a dozen townspeople who'd actually liked her father rather than just tolerated him. Doc Henderson was there, looking tired and older than his 50 years. The banker, a careful man named Willis, who'd always treated her father fairly. A few neighboring ranchers who'd traded work and supplies over the years. Mrs. Chen from the general store, who'd extended her father credit more times than Mara could count. No family. Raymond and Marcus and the rest had apparently decided to wait for her to fail rather than pretend to mourn. After the service, Doc Henderson pulled her aside. "Your father was a good man, Mara. Stubborn as a mule with a burr under its saddle, but good. He'd be proud of how you handled Raymond. Word got around? Honey, Raymond was complaining in the saloon within an hour of leaving here. Half the town's taking bets on how long you last." "And the other half?" Doc smiled grimly. "Taking bets on whether you shoot your uncle before Christmas or wait until spring." She surprised herself by almost laughing. "What are the odds?" "You'd make more money betting on Christmas. Most folks figure Raymond won't be able to help himself." After everyone left, Mara walked back to the house alone. It felt too big now, too quiet. The floorboards creaked under her boots, each sound echoing in rooms that had never seemed empty when her father was alive. His chair sat by the fireplace, the leather worn smooth from years of use. His tobacco pipe rested on the side table, still smelling faintly of the cherry blend he'd preferred. She picked up the pipe, turned it over in her hands, then carefully placed it back exactly where it had been. Tomorrow she'd start dealing with the debts. Tonight she just needed to breathe. The first week after the burial, Mara spent every waking hour trying to understand the scope of what her father had left behind. The ranch books were a mess. Thomas had never been good with numbers, and in his final years he'd stopped trying to track everything carefully. There were outstanding loans with the bank, credit extended at 3 different stores in town, debts to farriers and feed suppliers, and the man who'd sold them seed last spring. She made lists, numbers that made her stomach turn. The ranch owed nearly $800 in total, a staggering sum that would take years to pay off even if everything went perfectly, which nothing ever did. But there were assets too. The land itself, 200 acres of rough Montana territory that wasn't prime grazing but wasn't worthless either. The cattle, small herd though it was. The horses, including a breeding mare that her father had claimed would throw excellent foals. The house, the barn, the equipment. If she was smart, if she worked harder than she'd ever worked, if luck was on her side for once, she might be able to hold on. She started before dawn every morning, working until her hands bled and her back screamed. The fence repair alone took 2 weeks, walking every inch of the northern boundary, replacing posts that had rotted through, restringing wire that had rusted and snapped. She worked in freezing rain that turned the ground to mud, in wind that cut through her coat like knives, and the kind of bitter cold that made her fingers go numb even inside thick gloves. At night, she collapsed into bed too exhausted to dream, then woke before sunrise to do it all again. The town watched with a mixture of pity and anticipation. Some folks were genuinely kind. Mrs. Chen at the general store continued extending credit without being asked. Doc Henderson stopped by twice to check on her under the pretense of looking at a horse he might want to buy. A neighboring rancher named Sam Garrett sent over his 2 sons to help with the fence for a day without expecting payment. But others were already planning for her failure. Raymond made a point of visiting the bank every few days, asking Willis about foreclosure timelines. Pritchard started quietly spreading the word that he'd be interested in buying the property once Mara gave up. A young rancher named Cole Brennan, who'd proposed to her 3 years ago and never quite forgiven her for saying no, told anyone who'd listened that women weren't meant to run ranches and nature would prove him right soon enough. 6 weeks after her father's death, on a cold afternoon in late November, Mara was working in the flower garden when she heard a horse approaching. The garden was her one concession to something other than pure survival. Her father had planted it years ago, claiming her mother had loved flowers, and Mara had maintained it stubbornly, even when it seemed ridiculous to waste water and effort on something that didn't directly keep the ranch alive. There were roses, tough prairie varieties that could survive the harsh winters, wildflowers she'd transplanted from the hills, a few herbs her mother had apparently used for cooking and medicine. It was a small patch of beauty in a landscape of struggle, and she protected it fiercely. She looked up from pulling weeds to see a man riding toward the house on a dark bay horse. He sat straight in the saddle, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. As he got closer, she could make out more details. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face weathered by sun and wind into hard, clean lines. A stranger. Out here, strangers usually meant trouble. Mara stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, and waited. She'd left the rifle leaning against the porch, too far away to reach quickly. Stupid. Her father would have scolded her for being careless. The man reined his horse to a stop about 15 feet away and touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Calloway?" "That's right." Her voice came out cautious, neutral. "Can I help you?" "My name is Gideon Rowe. I ranch north of here, up near the Canadian border. I heard about your father's passing. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She studied him carefully, trying to read his intentions. He didn't look like a debt collector or a land speculator, but appearances could be deceiving. "That's a long ride just to offer condolences to someone you don't know." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Calloway. I didn't ride down here just to pay respects. I came to make you an offer." There it was. Her shoulders stiffened. "What kind of offer?" "I'd like to buy Iron Creek Ranch. All of it. The land, the buildings, the livestock. I'll pay fair market value, plus enough to clear any outstanding debts. You'd walk away free and clear, with money in your pocket to start fresh somewhere else." The words hung in the cold air between them. Mara felt something twist in her chest, a complicated mix of anger and exhaustion and bitter amusement. "Let me guess," she said quietly. "You heard that a woman alone couldn't possibly keep this place running. You figured I'd be desperate by now, ready to take any offer that got me out from under the burden. You probably thought you were being generous, riding all this way to save me from my own stubbornness." Gideon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That's about the shape of it. Yes, at least he was honest." She almost respected that. "Well, Mr. Rowe, I appreciate you being straight with me, so I'll return the favor. Iron Creek Ranch isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone, not now, not ever. My father built this place from nothing, and I promised him I'd hold it. So unless you've got some other business here, I'd suggest you turn that horse around and head back north." He didn't move. Instead, he looked past her at the ranch, the house with its weathered wood and sagging porch, the barn with its obvious roof damage, the pastures that clearly needed work. His gaze traveled slowly across the property, and she could practically see him calculating everything that was broken, everything that needed fixing, everything that would take money and labor and time she didn't have. When his eyes came back to her, they were different, sharper, more curious. "How long have you been working on those north fences?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "The fence line I rode past on my way in. Fresh posts, new wire in sections. That's hard work for one person." "How long did it take you?" She crossed her arms. 2 weeks. "By yourself?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, and she couldn't read what he was thinking. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable, and Mara was about to tell him again to leave when he spoke. "I'm a widower, Miss Calloway. Lost my wife 4 years ago to fever. I've got a son, 13 years old. The ranch up north is profitable, but it's big and it's lonely, and my boy needs more than just cattle and mountains. I came down here thinking I'd buy a second property, something closer to town, somewhere we could build a different kind of life." "That's not my problem," Mara said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. No, it's not. Gideon gathered his reins, preparing to leave. But I'll tell you something. In my experience, there are two kinds of people who refuse to sell land when every practical reason says they should. There are fools who don't understand what they're up against, and there are fighters who understand perfectly well and don't care. He turned his horse, then paused and looked back at her. You don't strike me as a fool, Miss Calloway. He rode away before she could form a response, leaving her standing in the flower garden with her heart beating too fast and her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite organize. That night, she dreamed of her father. He was standing in the barn, running his hand along the wooden stall where they'd kept her mother's favorite mare. The dream had the fuzzy, golden quality of memory. She was 12 again, skinny and awkward, watching him work. Some things are worth more than what they cost you to keep them, he was saying, though she couldn't remember if these were real words he'd spoken or just her mind creating what she needed to hear. Land has memory, Mara girl. It remembers the people who loved it, who worked it, who bled for it. That memory is worth something. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's not. She woke before dawn, as always, but this time she lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling beams her father had cut and fitted himself when he'd built this house 30 years ago. Worth something. She got up and went to work. The morning was brutal, 20 degrees and falling, with wind that cut through every layer of clothing she owned. She was hauling water from the creek to the livestock troughs, a job that took 2 hours of hard labor with buckets and a shoulder yoke when she saw the rider approaching. Gideon Rowe again, on the same dark bay horse. And this time he had a boy with him, gangly and quiet, sitting on a gray mare that looked too gentle to be anything but a careful choice for a young rider. Mara set down the buckets and waited, her arms aching, her breath misting in the cold air. Gideon reined up and nodded a greeting. Miss Calloway. Mr. Rowe. She glanced at the boy, who was watching her with dark eyes that seemed too serious for 13. I thought I made myself clear yesterday. You did. Gideon swung down from his horse with easy grace. I'm not here to make another offer. I'm here to fix your barn roof. She stared at him. What? Your barn roof is damaged. Next heavy snow, it's likely to collapse and kill whatever livestock you've got sheltered inside. I noticed it yesterday, and I've got the materials and the time. Thought I'd come help. I don't need... She stopped herself because that was a lie, and they both knew it. She did need help, desperately. The question was why he was offering it. What's the catch? No catch. Everyone wants something, Mr. Rowe. Call me Gideon. He pulled work gloves from his coat pocket. And you're right, I do want something. I want to see if I was right about you. Right about what? Whether you're the kind of fighter who can actually hold this place, or if you're just putting off the inevitable. He met her eyes steadily. Either way, your barn roof still needs fixing, and I don't like watching good livestock freeze because of pride. The boy spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. Pa's good with roofs, ma'am. He fixed ours after the hailstorm last spring, and I can help with the water hauling if you need it. Something in Mara's chest cracked, just a little. She looked at this man who'd ridden 2 days to try to buy her ranch, been refused, and then come back with tools and his son to help anyway. It didn't make sense. People didn't do things without expecting something in return. But the barn roof did need fixing, and winter was coming harder every day. Fine, she said finally, but I work alongside you. This is still my ranch, and I don't accept charity I didn't earn. Gideon smiled, quick and genuine. Wouldn't have it any other way, Miss Calloway. Mara, she said, if you're going to be on my roof, you might as well call me Mara. They worked until sunset, and Mara learned that Gideon Rowe was a man of few words but efficient action. He moved with the kind of calm competence that came from years of hard work, never wasting motion, never complaining. The boy, Caleb, was quiet but capable, doing what was asked without needing to be told twice. By the time darkness forced them to stop, they'd replaced half the damaged section and shored up the rest enough to survive until they could finish. Gideon cleaned his tools with the same careful attention he'd given the work itself. We'll come back tomorrow if that's all right with you. You don't have your own ranch to run? I do. But I've got good men working it, and this won't take more than another day or two. He paused. Besides, Caleb could use the experience. He's going to inherit everything I've built. He needs to learn how to look at property with honest eyes, see what's worth saving and what's just dead weight. The words shouldn't have stung, but they did. And which is Iron Creek? Don't know yet, Gideon said simply. That's why I'm here. They came back the next day, and the day after that. The barn roof was finished, then Gideon noticed the well problem and spent an afternoon helping her figure out where to dig a new one. Caleb proved surprisingly good with horses, spending hours working with the breeding mare Mara's father had prized. The town noticed, of course. Mrs. Chen mentioned it carefully when Mara came in for supplies. Heard you've got help out at the ranch. Temporary, Mara said, though she wasn't sure that was true anymore. That Roe man has a good reputation up north. Fair dealer, honest with his workers, treats his stock well. Mrs. Chen measured out flour with deliberate slowness. Of course, people are talking about what it means, him spending so much time at your place. People can think what they want. They will anyway, honey. Just wanted you to know what's being said. What was being said became clear enough when Raymond showed up at the ranch 3 days later, his face red with outrage. You think you're clever, don't you? He spat, not bothering with any pretense of family warmth. Getting yourself a man to work the place so you can pretend you're managing it alone. Gideon was there when Raymond arrived, working on the east fence with Caleb. He stopped at the sound of raised voices, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle he kept on his saddle. Mara stepped between them. Gideon's a neighbor helping a neighbor, that's all. That's not what the whole damn town is saying. Raymond's eyes were ugly with rage and something else, fear that his plans were falling apart. They're saying you've got yourself a husband in everything but name, that you're using him to keep property that should rightfully what? Mara's voice went dangerously quiet. Be yours? This land was never yours, Raymond. My father built it, and he left it to me. What I do with it, who I accept help from, is none of your business. The bank will get paid, every cent in time. Mr. Willis knows I'm good for it. Raymond opened his mouth to argue, then caught sight of Gideon walking toward them with that rifle in his hand. Not pointing it, not threatening, just carrying it with the casual readiness of a man who knew how to use it. You should leave, Gideon said quietly. This is family business. The lady asked you to leave her property. I'm suggesting you respect that request. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Raymond spat in the dirt, climbed back on his wagon, and left in a cloud of dust and fury. Mara waited until he was gone, then turned to Gideon. You didn't have to do that. I know. People are already talking. Let them talk. Gideon's expression was unreadable. Question is, does it bother you? Did it? A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. She'd spent her whole life being careful about her reputation, knowing that as an unmarried woman, she had to be twice as proper as anyone else just to be taken half as seriously. But looking at Gideon now, at this man who'd ridden into her life as a stranger trying to buy her ranch, and somehow become the only person other than her dead father who seemed to believe she could actually hold it, she found she didn't care what the town thought. No, she said, it doesn't bother me. Something changed in his face, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Good. He stayed until the fence was finished, then told her he needed to get back to his own ranch for a while. I'll be gone maybe 2 weeks. You need anything before then, you send word to Sam Garrett. He'll get a message to me. I'll be fine. I know you will. He swung up into his saddle, Caleb mounting beside him. But send word anyway if something comes up. She watched them ride away, and the ranch felt emptier than it had before they arrived. The 2 weeks without Gideon stretched longer than Mara expected. She told herself it was because the work went slower alone, that she'd simply gotten used to having extra hands around the place. But on the third morning after he left, she caught herself scanning the horizon for riders and forced herself to stop. She had a ranch to run, and depending on anyone, even someone who'd proven reliable, was dangerous. People left. People died. The only thing she could count on was herself and the land beneath her boots. December arrived with teeth bared. The temperature dropped so fast that the water in the troughs froze solid overnight, and Mara spent 2 hours every morning breaking ice with a sledgehammer just so the livestock could drink. Her hands cracked and bled despite the heavy gloves. Her back ached from hauling feed through snow that got deeper every day. And the money situation was getting worse. She'd paid what she could to Mrs. Chen and the feed supplier, but the banknote was coming due after the first of the year, and she was still $200 short. $200 might as well have been $2,000. Even if she sold half the remaining cattle, which would cripple the herd for years, she wouldn't make up the difference in time. She was sitting at her father's desk one night, staring at numbers that refused to add up differently, no matter how many times she recalculated them, when she heard horses outside. Multiple horses. Her hand went automatically to the rifle beside the desk as she moved to the window. 3 riders in the darkness, their forms barely visible in the light spilling from the house. Her heart started to pound. Night visitors were never good news, but then one of them called out, "Mara, it's Sam Garrett. Got a message for you." She opened the door cautiously, rifle still in hand. Sam was there with his 2 sons, the same boys who'd helped with her fence weeks ago. All 3 of them looked tired and cold, their breath misting in the frigid air. "Bit late for a social call, Sam. Got word from Gideon Rowe." Sam pulled a folded paper from his coat. "He sent a rider down asking me to check on you, make sure you were managing all right. Figured I'd come myself rather than send word back secondhand." She took the paper, her fingers numb from cold. The handwriting was blocky and efficient, just like the man himself. "Miss Calloway. Hope this finds you well. Situation up north took longer than expected. Won't be back until after Christmas at earliest. Sam Garrett is a good man and his sons know their way around ranch work. If you need help with anything, they'll see you through until I can return. Don't be stubborn about asking." Gideon Rowe. Something warm and uncomfortable twisted in her chest. She looked up at Sam, who was watching her with the careful neutrality of a man trying not to make assumptions. "That's kind of him," she said finally, "but I'm managing fine." Sam's older boy, a gangly 17-year-old named Patrick, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but we rode past your south pasture on the way in. You've got fence down in 3 places, and there are cattle tracks heading toward the breaks. You lose stock to those ravines, you'll be hunting frozen carcasses come spring." She wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd been so focused on keeping up with the daily survival tasks that she hadn't checked the far fences in over a week. If cattle had gotten out and wandered into the broken country to the south, they could be scattered across miles of rough terrain. "I'll handle it tomorrow," she said. "We're here now," Sam said quietly. "Boys and I can ride out at first light, sweep the breaks, bring back anything that's wandered. You can work the close-in repairs, keep the daily routine going. We'll be done in 2 days, 3 at most." Pride and practicality went to war in her head. Pride said she didn't need anyone's help, that accepting it made her weak, that every person she let in was another potential disappointment waiting to happen. Practicality said she was one woman trying to do the work of 4 people, and if she didn't accept help when it was genuinely offered, she'd lose everything anyway. Practicality won, but barely. 2 days, she said, and I pay you what I can when I can. Don't insult me, Mara. Sam's voice had an edge now. Your father helped me through a drought year that would have broken me. Gave me credit on hay when nobody else would. Didn't ask for payment until I was back on my feet. I owed him, and now I owe you. So we're helping, and there's no debt attached. Understood? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Sam and his boys made camp in the barn that night, refusing her offer of the house despite the cold. They were out before dawn, riding into the breaks with coiled ropes and the kind of easy competence that came from years of working difficult country. Mara spent the day on closer work, mucking stalls, repairing a section of corral fence that had started to splinter, checking the breeding mare, who was getting close to foaling. The mare was her father's last gamble, purchased with money they couldn't really afford in the hope that her bloodline would produce foals worth selling. If the mare died in foaling, or if the foal was weak or malformed, it would be another door closing on any chance of making the ranch profitable again. Patrick came back around midday with news. Found 11 head scattered through the ravines. A couple of them were in bad shape, cut up from thorns, half frozen. We're bringing them back slow. How bad is bad shape? One probably won't make it. The rest should pull through with some care. She nodded, calculating losses she couldn't afford. Thank you for finding them. Or, yes, ma'am. He hesitated, then added, My pa says you're doing what most men couldn't do, keeping this place going alone. Says your father would be proud. The words hit harder than she expected. She turned away, pretending to check the mare's water trough so Patrick wouldn't see her face. Your father's a kind man. He's an honest man, Patrick corrected. If he said it, he meant it. That night, After Sam and his boys had brought the cattle in and doctored the worst of the injuries, Mara made dinner for all of them. It wasn't much, venison stew and hard bread, but it was the first meal she'd shared with other people since her father died, and it made the house feel less like a tomb. Sam's younger boy, Michael, ate 3 bowls and asked if ranching was always this hard. Harder usually, Sam said. This is an easy year compared to some I've seen. Mara almost laughed at that. An easy year. Her father dead, the ranch drowning in debt, winter coming on like a hammer. But she supposed it was true. There'd been no drought, no epidemic among the cattle, no catastrophic injury that would have ended everything in an instant. Just the slow, grinding difficulty of trying to survive. Why do you do it then? Michael asked. If it's so hard, why not sell out and do something easier? Sam looked at Mara, then back at his son. Because some things are worth the fight. And because when you've put your blood and sweat into land, it becomes part of you. Selling it would be like cutting off your own arm. That's dramatic, Pa. Maybe, but it's true. They left the next morning after helping her move hay closer to the feeding areas. Sam gripped her shoulder as he mounted his horse. You need anything before spring, you send word. And don't wait until things are desperate. Asking for help before everything falls apart is smarter than asking after. I'll remember that. Will you, though? His eyes were shrewd. You're as stubborn as your father was, Mara. That's not always a virtue. She watched them ride away, then turned back to the endless list of tasks that never got shorter. But something felt different now, lighter. Maybe it was knowing that not everyone in the territory was waiting for her to fail. Maybe it was the simple fact of having survived another crisis without losing everything. Or maybe it was the letter still folded in her pocket, written in Gideon Rowe's careful hand, that reminded her she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Christmas came and went with little ceremony. Mara allowed herself one concession. She cut a small pine from the hills and set it up in the front room, decorating it with the simple ornaments her mother had made years ago. Glass baubles wrapped in faded ribbon, carved wooden stars, strings of dried berries. She sat alone on Christmas Eve, drinking coffee that had gone cold, and tried not to think about all the Christmases before this one, her father telling stories by the fire. Her mother, a dim memory now, singing carols in a language Mara had been too young to learn before she died. The years when the house had felt full instead of empty. On the day after Christmas, Gideon came back. She was in the barn checking on the breeding mare when she heard the horse. Her heart jumped before she could stop it, and she hated herself for the reaction. But when she stepped outside and saw Gideon riding up with Caleb beside him, both of them bundled against cold that had turned brutal, she couldn't quite suppress the relief that flooded through her. Gideon swung down from his horse, his face reddened from wind, his eyes tired but alert. Mara, you're back. Said I would be. He looked around the ranch, taking in the repairs that had been made, the cattle in the near pasture, the smoke rising from the chimney. Sam said you had some trouble with the south fence. Sam talks too much. Sam's a good friend. Gideon pulled saddlebags off his horse. How's the mare? Close. Maybe a week. Caleb had dismounted and was already heading toward the barn, moving with the kind of comfort that came from time spent in a place. Gideon watched his son go, then turned back to Mara. I brought supplies. Feed supplements for the mare, some extra lamp oil, coffee that doesn't taste like burnt dirt. He paused. And I was hoping you'd let us stay for a while. Through the worst of winter, maybe, if you're willing. The offer should have raised every defensive instinct she had. Instead, she found herself asking, why? Because my ranch up north is running fine without me standing over it every minute. Because Caleb needs more than just isolation and hard work. And because he stopped, seemed to reconsider his words, then continued. Because I keep thinking about what you're doing here. Building something from almost nothing, refusing to quit when everyone expects you to. That's worth being part of, even if it's just for a season. People will talk even more than they already are. Let them. The town will assume we're... She didn't know how to finish that sentence. The town can assume whatever it wants. I'm offering honest work for room and board. If you need help and I can provide it, seems foolish for both of us to pretend otherwise out of fear of gossip. Caleb appeared in the barn doorway. Pa, the mare's definitely close. She's waxing and her belly's dropped. Gideon looked at Mara, waiting for an answer. She should say no. She should protect herself from the complication of having people around, from the risk of depending on someone. from the inevitable moment when they'd leave and she'd be alone again. "Through winter," she said. "You help with the work, I'll feed you and give you the spare room. When spring comes, we reassess." Something that might have been satisfaction crossed his face. Fair enough. They fell into a routine that felt disturbingly natural. Gideon took over the heavy repairs and the far fence checks, the kind of work that required strength Mara had, but that left her exhausted for days. Caleb proved surprisingly capable with the horses and the detail work, cleaning tack, organizing the barn, keeping tools in working order. Mara handled the planning, the finances, the decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell, when to buy feed, and when to gamble on the weather holding. It was still her ranch, her responsibility, but now the crushing weight of doing everything alone had lifted just enough that she could breathe. The breeding mare foaled on a night when the temperature had dropped below zero and the wind was howling like something alive and hungry. Mara was in the barn when the labor started, and she sent Caleb running for Gideon while she tried to assess how the birth was progressing. Not well. The mare was down, straining, but nothing was happening. Mara ran her hands over the swollen belly, feeling for the foal's position, and her heart sank. Breach. The foal was coming backward, which meant both the mare and the baby were at risk. Gideon arrived running, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair wild from sleep. He took one look at the situation and started giving orders. "Caleb, get more light. Mara, I need hot water and clean cloths. Move." They worked for 2 hours in the freezing barn, trying to turn the foal, trying to help the mare push, trying everything they knew, and some things they were improvising out of desperation. The mare was failing, her strength giving out, and Mara could feel the moment approaching when they'd have to choose between saving the mother or trying to save the foal. "We're losing her," she said, her voice cracking. "Not yet." Gideon's arms were inside the mare up to his shoulders, his face set in concentration. "I've almost got the legs turned. Just there." The foal came in a rush of fluid and membrane, landing in the straw wet and still. Too still. The mare was breathing in shallow gasps, her eyes rolling with exhaustion and pain. Caleb was already moving, clearing the foal's nose and mouth, rubbing its sides with rough cloths, doing everything they'd taught him. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, breathe." Nothing. Mara felt something break inside her chest. Not the foal, not after all of this, not after everything they'd risked. Then Gideon was there, his hands on the small ribcage, pressing and releasing in a rhythm Mara recognized from watching her father try to revive a stillborn calf years ago. Once, twice, 3 times. The foal gasped, choked, and suddenly was breathing on its own, weak, ragged breaths, but breathing. Caleb let out a shout of triumph. Gideon sat back in the straw, his shirt ruined, his hands shaking from exhaustion, and met Mara's eyes. "Close," he said. "Too close." She looked at the foal, already trying to lift its head, and felt tears she hadn't known she was holding back finally spill over. "But we did it." "You did it," Gideon corrected. "This is your mare, your gamble. We just helped." They stayed in the barn until dawn, making sure both the mare and foal were stable, that the baby was nursing, that there were no complications developing. By the time the sun came up, Mara was so exhausted she could barely stand, but the foal was on its feet, wobbly but alive, and the mare was resting quietly. "It's a colt," Caleb said, his voice full of wonder. "And look at his legs, Pa. He's going to be tall." "Good bloodline," Gideon agreed. "Your father knew what he was doing when he bought this mare, Mara." She looked at the colt, at this new life that represented hope and future and the possibility that maybe, somehow, the ranch could survive. He always said she'd throw excellent foals. He was right. They walked back to the house in the cold dawn light, none of them speaking, too tired for conversation. But when they reached the porch, Gideon touched her arm. "You should rest. I'll handle the morning work." I know you can, but you don't have to. Not today." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She made it to her bedroom, collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots, and fell asleep instantly. When she woke, it was afternoon and the house smelled like cooking food. She stumbled into the kitchen to find Caleb at the stove, stirring something in a pot with the intense concentration of someone who wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. "It's supposed to be stew," he said when he saw her. "Pa said you needed real food, not just coffee and hard bread. I might have added too much salt." She tasted it. It was oversalted, and the vegetables were unevenly cut, and it was possibly the best thing anyone had made for her in months. It's perfect. Caleb's face lit up with pride, and Mara felt something in her chest shift. This boy, this quiet kid who'd been so serious when she first met him, was starting to smile more, talk more, exist in the world with less of the careful wariness that grief left behind. She understood that wariness. She'd been living with it herself since her father died. After they ate, she made herself go check on the books again, face the numbers that hadn't gotten better just because a foal had survived. The banknote was due in less than a week, and she was still short. Not as badly as before. She'd sold some cattle to a buyer from Helena at a decent price, but enough that she'd have to grovel to Willis and beg for an extension. She was staring at the ledger when Gideon came in, stomping snow off his boots. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one, if the sky's any indication. We should bring the cattle in closer, make sure everything's secured." "All right." She didn't look up from the numbers. He was quiet for a moment, then crossed the room and looked over her shoulder at the ledger. She thought about closing it, hiding the extent of the financial disaster. But what was the point? He'd been living here for weeks. He knew how tight things were. "How short are you?" he asked quietly. $70. Might as well be 700. "I could—" "No." She closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "I'm not taking money from you, Gideon. It would be a loan. You could pay me back when— When what? When some miracle happens and the ranch becomes profitable? When I suddenly have extra money lying around?" She stood, needing to move, to pace, to do something other than sit still with her failure. "I appreciate what you've done here. I do. But I'm not going to dig myself deeper into debt, especially not to you." "Why especially not to me?" "Because it would change things. Because accepting money from him would shift the balance between them, make her beholden in a way she couldn't afford to be. Because she was already depending on him more than she'd intended, and adding financial debt to that equation felt dangerous." "Just because," she said finally. Gideon studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind—" "I won't." The storm hit that night with a fury that made the previous winter weather seem gentle. Wind screamed around the house, driving snow so thick that Mara couldn't see the barn from the window. The temperature plummeted until the inside of the house was cold despite the fire roaring in the hearth. They spent 3 days trapped inside while the storm raged. Mara paced like a caged animal, worried about the livestock, the buildings, everything that could be going wrong that she couldn't see or fix. Gideon remained calm, almost maddeningly so, working on repairing tack and tools inside while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. Caleb read books from Thomas Calloway's small collection, occasionally asking Mara questions about ranching that showed he was paying attention to more than just the immediate work. On the second night, while Caleb was asleep and the wind was still howling, Gideon broke the comfortable silence they'd fallen into. "Can I ask you something?" Mara looked up from the harness she was mending. "Go ahead. Why are you so determined to hold this place? And don't say it's because you promised your father. There's more to it than that." She set down the harness, considering whether to answer honestly, but they'd been through enough together that pretense seemed pointless. "Because if I lose this ranch, what was the point of any of it? My mother dying in childbirth, my father working himself to death, all the years I spent here instead of going to San Francisco or Denver or anywhere else where a woman might actually have options." She stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "If I lose Iron Creek, then it all meant nothing. Every sacrifice, every hard choice, every time we did without so we could keep this land, it all becomes just wasted suffering, and I can't accept that." "It wouldn't mean nothing," Gideon said quietly. "Your parents lived, they loved each other, and they loved you. That matters whether the ranch survives or not." "Easy for you to say. You still have your ranch." "I do. But I lost my wife anyway. And I spent a long time after Sarah died trying to work hard enough that I wouldn't have to think about what I'd lost. Took me years to understand that holding on to the ranch didn't make up for losing her. They were separate things, and pretending otherwise just made the grief worse." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she'd been too caught up in her own struggle to notice before. He was tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight for too long without anyone to help shoulder it. "How did she die?" Mara asked. "Fever. Came on fast, took her in 4 days." One morning she was fine, laughing at something Caleb said. 4 days later, she was gone. His voice stayed steady, but his hands gripped his coffee cup hard enough that his knuckles went white. I had the best doctor within 100 miles. Had medicine, had help, didn't matter. Sometimes things end whether you fight or not. That's a bleak philosophy. It's an honest one. He set down the cup. But here's the other part. Sometimes things survive when they shouldn't. Sometimes you fight impossible odds and win anyway. The trick is knowing which situation you're in. And which situation am I in? Don't know yet, but I'm starting to think you might pull this off. The words settled between them, warm and unexpected. Mara felt her throat tighten. Why do you care, she asked. About this ranch, about whether I succeed. You don't know me. A few months ago you were trying to buy this place so you could tear it down and build something different. Gideon was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, because I watched my wife die and couldn't do anything to stop it. Couldn't fight hard enough, work hard enough, be good enough to save her. But here you are, fighting for something that everyone says is already dead, and refusing to quit. And maybe... He stopped, shook his head. Maybe I need to see if the fighting actually matters sometimes. If it's possible to hold on to something worth having, even when the world's trying to take it away. She understood then. He wasn't here because he pitied her, or because he wanted to own her ranch, or even because he was a good man doing the right thing. He was here because he needed to believe that effort mattered, that struggle could lead to something other than loss. They were both trying to prove something, just to different audiences. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, revealing a landscape transformed into something alien and beautiful and dangerous. Snow had drifted in places higher than the fence posts. The barn roof, the one Gideon had repaired, had held, but 2 sections of corral fence had collapsed under the weight. They found 3 dead cattle, frozen in a draw where they'd sought shelter that became a trap. The loss hurt, but it could have been worse. Much worse. We were lucky, Gideon said, surveying the damage. Lucky. Mara's laugh came out bitter. 3 head dead, fences destroyed, and we burned through a week's worth of feed in 4 days. If that's lucky, I'd hate to see unlucky. You would. His voice was grim. I've seen unlucky. This isn't it. They spent the next week digging out, repairing, trying to recover from what the storm had taken. The work was brutal, and Mara felt every one of her 35 years in her aching back and cracked hands. But they managed. On the day she was supposed to go into town to face the bank, she woke to find Gideon already up, drinking coffee in the kitchen. I'll ride in with you, he said, if you want company. She wanted to say no, wanted to handle this alone the way she handled everything. But the truth was, she didn't want to face Willis and his ledgers by herself, didn't want to ride back alone after begging for more time she might not get. All right, she said. Thank you. They rode into town through snow that was melting in patches, creating mud that sucked at the horses' hooves. The town looked tired in the winter light, buildings weathered by hard seasons, people moving through the streets with their heads down against cold that never quite left. The bank was warm, at least, heated by a stove that radiated more heat than Mara's entire house. Willis looked up when they entered, his expression shifting from polite greeting to concern when he saw who it was. Mara, Mr. Rowe. He stood, gestured to chairs. I've been expecting you. I'm short on the payment, Mara said without preamble. $70 short. The storm killed cattle, destroyed fences. I need an extension. Willis pulled out her file, reviewing numbers he probably had memorized. You've been making regular payments, smaller than agreed but consistent. That counts for something. He looked at her over his spectacles. But the bank has limits on how much flexibility I can offer. My board has been asking questions about this loan. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests they'd like to see it resolved one way or another, either paid in full or, he paused delicately, or restructured. Restructured means foreclosure, Mara said flatly. Not necessarily. It could mean bringing in a partner, someone with capital who could help manage the debt in exchange for partial ownership. She knew exactly who would volunteer for that role. Raymond had probably already talked to the board. Gideon spoke for the first time. What if she had the full payment? Would that satisfy the board? Willis looked at him curiously. If the note was current, they'd have no grounds to push for restructuring. Why? Just exploring options. Gideon stood. Give us a moment. He pulled Mara outside into the cold street where their breath misted between them. Let me pay the $70. No. Mara said, I said no. I'm not going to be in debt to you. You're already in debt. This just changes who you owe. It changes everything. She felt panic rising in her chest, the trapped feeling of walls closing in. If I owe you money, then you have leverage. You could demand payment, force me to sell, claim ownership if I default. It makes you no different than Raymond or any of the other vultures. His jaw tightened. You think I'd do that? After everything? After the roof and the fence and the foal and all of it? You think I'd use money to take your ranch? I don't know what you'd do. I don't know you well enough to be certain. The words hung between them, brutal and honest. Gideon's face went carefully blank, the same expression she'd seen him use when he was checking livestock or assessing storm damage, evaluating a situation without emotion. You're right, he said finally. You don't know me. So here's what I know about myself. I'm not a saint. I'm not even particularly noble, but I don't take from people who are fighting as hard as you are, and I don't use debt as a weapon. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat, heavy with coins, and pressed it into her hand. This is a gift, not a loan. You don't owe me anything. Pay the bank, keep the ranch, and we're even. She stared at the pouch, feeling its weight. $70. Maybe more. Enough to buy her time, buy her breathing room, buy her a chance to make it through to spring. I can't accept this. Why not? Because she struggled to find words for the complicated tangle of pride and fear and stubborn independence that made accepting help feel like surrender. Because I have to do this myself. Why? His voice was gentle now, but insistent. Why do you have to do everything alone? What are you trying to prove, and who are you trying to prove it to? To her father, to the town, to herself, to every person who'd ever looked at her and seen only a woman who'd never be enough. If I don't hold Iron Creek on my own terms, then I haven't really held it at all, she said. That's pride talking, not sense. Maybe, but it's my pride and my choice. Gideon took the pouch back, his expression unreadable. All right, then go in there and tell Willis you need more time. Beg if you have to. See where that gets you. He walked away, leading his horse toward the saloon, leaving her standing in the street with her stubbornness and her debt and her rapidly dwindling options. She went back into the bank, sat down across from Willis, and did exactly what Gideon had said. She asked for more time, explained the storm damage, promised she'd make up the difference within 2 months. Willis listened, made notes, and finally shook his head. I can give you 30 days, Mara. After that, the board will force my hand. If the payment isn't current by then, they'll move to restructure regardless of what I recommend. 30 days. It might as well have been 30 hours. She left the bank feeling hollowed out, defeated in a way the physical work never made her feel. This was different. This was the slow realization that maybe effort wasn't enough, that fighting hard didn't guarantee victory, that sometimes the world simply crushed you no matter how fiercely you resisted. Gideon was waiting outside the saloon, his face carefully neutral. How did it go? 30 days. Her voice came out flat. Then they foreclose. He nodded slowly. And you're still refusing the money? Yes. All right. He mounted his horse. Let's go home. They rode back in silence, the afternoon sun weak and cold on their faces. Mara felt numb, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. She'd been fighting for so long, carrying so much weight, and for the first time since her father's death, she let herself wonder if maybe everyone had been right. Maybe a woman alone couldn't hold a ranch. Maybe all her struggle was just postponing the inevitable. Maybe the smart thing to do was accept defeat gracefully while she still had options. When they reached Iron Creek, Caleb ran out to meet them, his face excited. The colt stood by himself for almost 10 minutes, and the mare's milk is coming in strong. Pa, you should see how... He stopped, looking between them, reading the tension. What happened? Nothing, Mara said, dismounting. Just bank business. But Caleb wasn't fooled, and neither was Gideon. They moved through the evening routine with careful politeness, everyone aware that something had fractured, but no one quite willing to name it. That night, lying in her bed staring at the ceiling, Mara let herself cry for the first time since her father died. Not loud, dramatic tears, just silent ones that soaked into her pillow and changed nothing except that afterwards she felt emptier and somehow lighter at the same time. Tomorrow she'd figure out a solution. Tomorrow she'd come up with a plan. Tomorrow she'd find a way to make the impossible math work out. But tonight, she just let herself feel the weight of it all. Morning came too early, the way it always did. Mara forced herself out of bed before dawn, her eyes gritty from tears and lack of sleep, and made coffee that tasted like dirt. Through the kitchen window she could see Gideon already working in the barn, his movements efficient in the lamplight. He'd probably been up for an hour handling tasks without being asked, the way he'd done every day since arriving. The weight of her refusal sat heavy in her chest. $70. A gift, not a loan, and she'd thrown it back in his face because of pride she couldn't quite justify even to herself. She was pouring her second cup of coffee when Caleb shuffled in, his hair sticking up at odd angles, his eyes still half closed with sleep. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. "You're too young for coffee. Pa lets me have it sometimes." He poured himself a cup anyway, added enough sugar to make it basically candy, and sat down across from her. They drank in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Are you mad at Pa?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "What makes you think that? You barely talked to him last night, and he got real quiet the way he does when something's bothering him." Caleb studied her with eyes that were too perceptive for 13. "Did he do something wrong?" "No." She wrapped her hands around her cup, seeking warmth. "Your father's been nothing but helpful." "Then why are you acting weird?" "I'm not—" She stopped, because she was, and they both knew it. "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain things." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "You sound like you've got this all figured out. I know my pa offered you money, and you said no." Caleb took a sip of his syrup coffee. "I heard you arguing outside the bank. The whole street probably heard you arguing outside the bank." Heat crept up her neck. "You shouldn't have been listening. Wasn't trying to. You were just loud." He set down his cup. "Pa's not trying to take your ranch, you know. He's got his own ranch, a good one. He doesn't need yours." "I know that." "Do you? Because it seems like you think everyone who tries to help you is secretly trying to steal something." The words stung because they were close to true. She'd spent so long defending Iron Creek from people who genuinely did want to take it that she'd started seeing threats everywhere, even from people who'd proven themselves trustworthy. "Your father's been very kind," she said carefully, "but accepting money from someone changes the relationship, creates obligations. You let Sam Garrett help with the cattle. You didn't pay him. That's different." "How?" She didn't have a good answer for that. Or rather, she had an answer, but it was too complicated to explain to a 13-year-old boy. Sam Garrett was a neighbor, someone safely in the category of friendly acquaintance. Gideon was something else entirely, something undefined that made her nervous in ways she didn't want to examine. "Just trust me," she said finally. "It's different." Caleb shrugged, clearly unconvinced, and finished his coffee in silence. Then he stood, rinsed his cup with the careful precision his father had probably drilled into him, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "My ma died when I was 9, he said, without looking back. For a long time after, Pa wouldn't let anyone help with anything, wouldn't accept food people brought, wouldn't let neighbors work our land even when we were behind on everything. He said he had to do it himself or it didn't mean anything." "Caleb, you know what almost happened? We almost lost the ranch. Not because Pa wasn't working hard enough, he was working himself to death, but because one person can't do everything, no matter how stubborn they are. It was only when he finally let Sam's brother come help with the harvest that we made it through." He looked back at her then, his young face serious. "Pa learned that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It just makes you smart. Maybe you should learn it too." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Mara sat alone in the kitchen, staring into her coffee, and felt something crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Maybe the boy was right. Maybe her determination to do everything alone wasn't strength. It was just another form of fear. She found Gideon in the barn, checking the breeding mare and her colt. The mare was doing well, the colt stronger every day. Both of them proof that sometimes risks paid off. Sometimes things survived when they shouldn't. "We need to talk," she said. Gideon straightened, his expression guarded. "All right. I was wrong yesterday about the money." The words came hard, but she forced them out. You were trying to help, and I treated you like you were another Raymond, trying to steal what's mine. That wasn't fair. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand why you're protective. You've got reason to be. That doesn't make it right. She took a breath. If the offer still stands, I'd like to accept it. The $70. As a gift, like you said. It stands. I don't know when I'll be able to pay you back. It's a gift, Mara. That means you don't pay it back. That's what gift means. She nodded, her throat tight. Thank you. You're welcome. He went back to checking the colt, running his hands over the spindly legs, the small hooves. For what it's worth, I think your father would be proud of how hard you fought for this place, but I also think he'd want you to accept help when it's offered honestly. He wasn't the kind of man who mistook stubbornness for strength. You never met him. How would you know? Because he raised you. And you're stubborn, sure, but you're not stupid. You know when you're beaten, you just don't like admitting it. He smiled faintly. That takes a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that comes from good teaching. Something warm and painful expanded in her chest. She blinked hard, refusing to cry again. He would have liked you, I think. That's good to know. They worked together the rest of the morning, and the tension that had stretched between them since the bank visit finally eased. Caleb watched them with poorly concealed satisfaction, clearly pleased that whatever damage had been done was being repaired. 2 days later, Mara rode back into town with $70 in her pocket. Money that wasn't hers, that she hadn't earned, that came from charity she'd sworn she'd never accept. But the ranch was worth more than her pride, and survival mattered more than how she felt about the means of achieving it. Willis counted the money with his usual precision, made notations in his ledger, and stamped her payment book with obvious relief. That brings you current, he said. The board won't be happy, but they can't force restructuring if the payments are up to date. How unhappy will they be? Unhappy enough that I'd suggest keeping current from here on out. Don't give them an excuse to push harder. He looked at her over his spectacles. Your uncle has been very vocal about his concerns regarding this loan. I'm sure he has. He's also been asking questions about what happens to the property if you die without heirs. Ice slid down her spine. What kind of questions? Hypothetical ones, he claims, but the kind that suggest he's hoping for a particular answer. Willis's expression was grim. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but your father was a friend. Watch yourself, Mara. Raymond's getting desperate, and desperate men do foolish things. She left the bank with the payment settled, but a new worry gnawing at her. Raymond asking about inheritance rights. Raymond making plans for a future where she was conveniently dead. It was probably nothing, just her uncle being his usual opportunistic self, planning for every possible scenario. But the warning stayed with her on the long ride back to the ranch, a cold weight in her stomach that had nothing to do with the winter air. When she got home, she found Gideon and Caleb working on the corral fence, replacing posts that had rotted through. Normal work. Everyday tasks. The kind of routine that made life feel stable even when nothing actually was. Payment accepted, she told them. We're current through February. That's good. Gideon drove another post into the frozen ground. Gives us breathing room to get through winter. Us. He'd said us, as if the ranch's survival was his concern too, as if somewhere along the way they'd become a unit rather than separate people occupying the same space. January settled in with the kind of cold that made breathing painful and turned the landscape into something hostile and unforgiving. They fell into deeper routines, Gideon handling the far work, Mara managing the close-in tasks and the finances, Caleb doing the detail work that kept everything running smoothly. In the evenings, they gathered in the front room, Mara working on mending while Gideon maintained equipment, and Caleb read from her father's books or practiced his letters. It felt disturbingly like family, like something permanent, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Because Gideon had said through winter, when spring came, they'd reassess. And reassessing probably meant leaving, meant going back to his own ranch up north, meant taking Caleb and the stability and the presence that had somehow become essential to her daily existence. She tried not to think about that, tried to focus on the immediate needs, keeping the livestock alive, maintaining the buildings, making it through each day without disaster. But late at night, lying in bed listening to the house settle, she couldn't stop her mind from wandering to the question of what came next. After winter, after survival, after proving she could hold the ranch. What then? The answer came from an unexpected direction. She was in town in mid-January, picking up supplies at Mrs. Chen's store, when Cole Brennan walked in. Cole, who'd proposed 3 years ago and never quite forgiven her rejection. Cole, who'd been loudly predicting her failure since her father's death. He nodded to her with exaggerated politeness. "Mara, heard you made your bank payment. Congratulations." "Thank you. Of course, there's talk about where the money came from." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Some folks are saying that Roe Fellow's been more than just a helping hand around your place." Mrs. Chen made a sharp noise from behind the counter. "Cole Brennan, you watch your mouth in my store." "I'm just repeating what people are saying." Cole held up his hands in mock innocence. "Man and woman living together, not married, spending months under the same roof. People draw conclusions." Mara felt heat crawl up her neck, anger and embarrassment warring in her chest. "Gideon Rowe is a neighbor helping another neighbor, that's all." "That's so." "Because I heard he's planning to stay through spring. Maybe longer. Seems like more than neighboring to me." "What seems like to you isn't my concern. Maybe it should be." Cole stepped closer, dropping his voice. "You know what happens to women who get reputations in towns like this? They become unmarriageable, unwelcome. Nobody wants to associate with someone who—" "That's enough." Mrs. Chen's voice cracked like a whip. "Get out of my store, Cole. Now." "I'm just trying to help Mara understand. Out, before I tell your mother what kind of poison you're spreading about decent people." Cole left, but not before shooting Mara a look that promised this wasn't over. She finished her shopping in silence, paid Mrs. Chen, and was heading for the door when the older woman stopped her. "Don't listen to him, honey. Cole's bitter because you had the sense not to marry him, but he's not completely wrong about one thing. People are talking. Let them talk. I agree with the sentiment, but you should know what's being said so you're not blindsided." Mrs. Chen's expression was kind but firm. "Half the town thinks you and Gideon are already married in all but name. The other half thinks you're living in sin, and it's only a matter of time before scandal ruins you both." "There's nothing scandalous happening. I believe you. But belief isn't the same as proof, and in a town this size, reputation is everything." She paused. "Have you and Gideon talked about making the arrangement official?" "Official how?" "Marriage, dear. If you're going to live together anyway, if he's helping run the ranch and you're building a life together, why not make it legal? Would solve the gossip problem and give you both protection under the law." The suggestion should have been absurd. She barely knew Gideon. They'd met 4 months ago when he'd tried to buy her ranch. Marriage was something else entirely, something that required trust and commitment and feelings she wasn't sure she had. But as Mara rode home through the frozen landscape, Mrs. Chen's words echoed in her head. Why not make it official? What was the difference between what they were doing now and what a marriage would look like? Companionship, shared work, mutual support. They already had all of that. The difference, she realized, was permanence. Right now, Gideon could leave whenever he wanted. Marriage would be a commitment that couldn't be easily undone, a promise that went both ways. And that terrified her. She was still turning the idea over in her mind when she got back to the ranch and found Raymond's wagon in the yard. Her uncle was standing on the porch, arguing with Gideon while Caleb watched from the barn doorway. Both men looked angry, their voices carrying across the frozen air. "Not her husband, which means you've got no legal standing here," Raymond was saying. "And you've got no legal standing at all," Gideon shot back. "Mara made it clear months ago that you're not welcome." Family is always welcome, unlike drifters who show up out of nowhere and take advantage of a vulnerable woman. Mara dismounted, fury burning through her exhaustion. "I'm standing right here, Raymond. If you've got something to say about me, say it to my face." Raymond turned, his expression shifting to false concern. "Mara, sweetheart, I've been hearing disturbing things about your living arrangements, about this man who's taken up residence in your home. Gideon lives in the spare room and works this ranch as hard as I do. What's disturbing about that? It's improper, it's shameful, and it's damaging your reputation in town." Raymond climbed down from the porch, moving toward her with the careful steps of someone approaching a skittish horse. "People are saying terrible things about your morals, about whether you're fit to manage this property. I don't care what people are saying. You should, because if the town decides you're living in sin, if they decide you're not fit to manage your father's legacy, They can make life very difficult for you. The bank, the suppliers, the neighbors who've been helping, all of them could turn away. It was a threat wrapped in concern, and they both knew it. Mara felt her hands curl into fists. Get off my property. I'm trying to help you. If you just listen, she told you to leave. Gideon's voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made Raymond pause. I suggest you do it before I help you off the property personally. Raymond's face darkened. You threatening me? Stating a fact. You've been told to leave. Stay, and you're trespassing. Out here, we handle trespassers however we see fit. For a moment, it looked like Raymond might push the issue. Then he seemed to remember that Gideon was younger, bigger, and considerably more dangerous than an aging man whose primary weapon was manipulation. This isn't over, Raymond said, climbing back into his wagon. The town won't stand for this kind of behavior. You'll see. He left in a spray of frozen mud, and Mara stood watching until he was out of sight. Then she turned to Gideon. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to deal with my family's garbage. I've dealt with worse. He studied her face. What did Mrs. Chen say in town? How did you know I saw Mrs. Chen? You always stop at her store when you go to town, and you've got that look you get when someone said something that's still rolling around in your head. He knew her too well. That should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt almost comforting. Someone who paid attention, someone who noticed. She said people are talking about us living together, about what it means. Mara met his eyes. She suggested we should get married to stop the gossip. Gideon went very still. And what did you say? I didn't say anything. I left. She crossed her arms, suddenly cold despite her coat. But she's not wrong. If Raymond's already making noise about my reputation, it's only going to get worse. He'll use it against me somehow. Convince the bank I'm not fit to manage the property. Turn the town against us. So what do you want to do? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What did she want? A few months ago, the answer would have been simple. Keep the ranch, survive alone, prove everyone wrong. But nothing was simple anymore. I don't know, she admitted. What do you want? Gideon looked away toward the mountains that rose beyond the ranch, their peaks white against the winter sky. I came here thinking I'd buy a second property, a place where Caleb could have more than just isolation, where maybe we could build something different than what we had up north. You can't buy this place, I told you that. I know, but that doesn't mean I've stopped wanting those things. He turned back to her. I've been thinking maybe there's another way to build what I was looking for. Not buying land, but becoming part of something that already exists. Her heart started beating faster. Meaning what? Meaning maybe Mrs. Chen's not wrong. Maybe we should consider making this arrangement official. He held up a hand before she could interrupt. Not because of gossip or reputation or what the town thinks, but because we work well together, because this ranch needs both of us to survive, because Caleb needs stability and you need help and I need... He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. I need to be part of something that matters again. And this place matters. You matter. The words hit her like a physical blow. You matter. Not the ranch, not the land, not the strategic advantage of partnership. Her. This is insane, she said. We barely know each other. I know you wake before dawn every day and work until your hands bleed. I know you'd rather die than give up this ranch. I know you sing while you work in the flower garden when you think no one's listening. I know you pretend coffee tastes good even though you hate it, and you're scared of the breeding mare even though you'd never admit it, and you care so much about doing right by your father's memory that it's eating you alive. He stepped closer. So maybe we don't know favorite colors or childhood stories or all the small things people usually learn before they make this kind of decision. But I know the things that matter, and that seems like enough to build on. Mara's throat was too tight to speak. Everything he'd said was true, and the fact that he'd noticed, that he'd paid attention to details she thought she'd hidden, made something in her chest ache. What about love? She managed finally. What about it? People usually get married because they love each other. People get married for all kinds of reasons. Land, money, family pressure, practicality. His expression was steady, honest. We'd be getting married for the ranch, yes, but also because we respect each other. Because we've proven we can work together through hard times. That's more than a lot of couples start with. And if it doesn't work, if we make each other miserable, then we'll be two miserable people running a ranch instead of one exhausted woman doing it alone and one widower raising a son in isolation. Still seems like an improvement. Despite everything, she almost laughed. Leave it to Gideon to make marriage sound like a practical business decision rather than a romantic gesture. But maybe that was what she needed. Not romance or grand declarations, but honesty and pragmatism, and someone who understood that sometimes survival mattered more than sentiment. I need to think about it, she said. Take your time. He started toward the barn, then paused. But Mara, whatever you decide, I'm not leaving when spring comes, not unless you tell me to go. The ranch needs more than seasonal help, and Caleb's finally starting to feel at home somewhere. So marriage or not, we're staying, if you'll have us. He left her standing in the yard, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never let herself consider before. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, weighing options that all felt impossible in different ways. Marry a man she'd known for 4 months. Keep living with him unmarried and watch the town turn against them. Send him away and go back to handling everything alone. None of the choices were good, but some were less terrible than others. In the morning, she found Gideon in the barn doing the early feeding. Caleb was still asleep in the house, which meant they could talk without an audience. I'll marry you, she said without preamble. But I have conditions. Gideon set down the hay he'd been distributing and turned to face her. I'm listening. The ranch stays in my name, all of it. You get no legal claim to the property. Agreed. If this doesn't work, if we end up hating each other, we figure out a separation that doesn't destroy everything we've built. Makes sense. And we're honest with each other. No pretending this is something it's not. It's a partnership for survival, not a love story. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to read. Anything else? Caleb needs to be told the truth, that this is practical, not romantic. I won't have him thinking we're something we're not. He's 13, not stupid. He'll figure out the real situation fast enough. Gideon crossed his arms. My turn for conditions. She nodded, bracing herself. You trust me. Not blindly, but enough to accept help when I offer it. Enough to let me make decisions about ranch work without second-guessing everything. That's fair. And you stop trying to do everything alone. We're partners, which means we split the burden. You carry too much, you'll break, and that doesn't help anyone. The words were uncomfortably close to what Caleb had said weeks ago. Fine. One more thing. His voice was quieter now. We give this a real chance. Not just going through motions because it's practical, but actually trying to build something worth keeping. Because Caleb deserves better than 2 people tolerating each other, and so do you. She wanted to argue that they'd already agreed this was practical, not romantic, that real chances were for people who believed in love and happy endings. But looking at Gideon's face, at the honesty there, she found herself nodding. All right, we give it a real chance. Then we have a deal. He held out his hand. She took it, his palm rough and warm against hers, and they shook like business partners sealing a contract, which she supposed was exactly what they were. Telling Caleb turned out to be both easier and harder than expected. The boy took the news with surprising calm, just nodded and said, About time. You're not surprised? Mara asked. I've got eyes. You two have been dancing around this for weeks. He grinned, looking more like a regular 13-year-old than she'd ever seen him. So when's the wedding? Soon, Gideon said. No point waiting. Can I be there? Of course you'll be there. You think we'd get married without you? Caleb's grin got wider. This mean Mara's going to be like my ma now? The question hit Mara like a bucket of cold water. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered that marrying Gideon meant becoming something like a parent to his son. The responsibility of that felt enormous, terrifying. I'm not trying to replace your mother, she said carefully, but I'll do my best to be someone you can count on. That's all I'm asking. Caleb shrugged like it was simple, like family was just that easy to define. Maybe for him it was. They got married 3 days later in the front room of the ranch house, with Doc Henderson serving as witness and Sam Garrett standing up as Gideon's informal best man. Mrs. Chen came out despite the cold, bringing a cake she'd baked and refusing to accept payment. There was no preacher. The nearest one was 2 towns away, and Mara didn't see the point in waiting. Instead, Sam, who'd served as a justice of the peace years ago, did the honors. The ceremony was brief, practical, stripped of any romance or religious sentiment. Do you, Gideon Rowe, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife to share your life and work with for as long as you both shall agree? I do. And do you, Mara Calloway, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband to share your life and work with for as long as you both shall agree? The words stuck in her throat for a moment. This was it, the point of no return. Once she said yes, everything changed. But everything had already changed, hadn't it? The moment Gideon rode onto her property 4 months ago, the moment he'd fixed her barn roof, the moment she'd accepted his help and his money and his presence. This was just making official what was already true. "I do," she said. "Then by the authority granted to me by the territory of Montana, I declare you husband and wife." Sam smiled. "Gideon, you can kiss your bride if you're so inclined." Gideon looked at her, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, almost formal, nothing like the passionate embraces she'd read about in the few novels that had passed through her hands over the years. But it was real, and that mattered more than passion. Mrs. Chen cried during the vows, which surprised no one. Doc Henderson shook both their hands and told them they'd made a smart decision. Caleb ate half the cake by himself and looked happier than Mara had ever seen him. After everyone left, the three of them stood in the front room, the cake demolished, the house quiet again. "So," Caleb said finally, "does this mean you're moving into Pa's room now?" Mara felt her face heat. She and Gideon had somehow managed to avoid discussing sleeping arrangements in all their practical planning. "That's between your father and me," she said. "I'll take the spare room," Gideon said. No sense changing what's been working. Part of her was relieved. Part of her felt vaguely insulted, though she couldn't articulate why. They'd agreed this was practical, not romantic. Separate rooms made sense. "Whatever you think is best," she said. That night, lying in her own bed in her own room, Mara stared at the ceiling and tried to process the fact that she was married, legally bound to a man she'd known for 4 months. Responsible for a child who wasn't hers by blood, but was now hers by law. It should have felt wrong, rushed, reckless. Instead, it just felt like the next logical step in a journey she hadn't planned, but was somehow on anyway. She fell asleep thinking about Gideon's words from earlier. "You matter," and wondering if maybe, despite all her careful protections and practical decisions, she was starting to believe that might actually be true. The first week of marriage was strange in ways Mara hadn't anticipated. Nothing had changed, really. Gideon still slept in the spare room. They still divided the work the same way, still ate meals together and discussed ranch business over coffee. But everything felt different because of a piece of paper filed at the county office, and a ceremony that had taken less than 15 minutes. She was Mrs. Rowe now, at least legally. Though she still thought of herself as Mara Calloway, still signed the ranch documents with her maiden name, still felt like the same person she'd been before Sam Garrett had pronounced them married. The town noticed, of course. Word spread faster than wildfire, and within days, everyone within 50 miles knew that Mara Calloway had married that Rowe fellow from up north. The reactions were mixed. Some people seemed genuinely pleased, others disappointed that there wouldn't be a scandal to gossip about, and still others suspicious about the speed of it all. Raymond was furious. He showed up at the ranch a week after the wedding, his face purple with rage, demanding to speak to Mara alone. Gideon informed him politely that whatever he had to say could be said in front of both of them, since they were married now and partners in all things. "This is a sham," Raymond spat, "a desperate grab to keep control of property you can't manage." "The property's being managed just fine," Gideon said evenly. "Better than fine, actually. We made all the bank payments, the livestock are healthy, and we've already started planning spring planting." "You married her for the land, everyone knows it." "I married her because she's a capable woman, and we work well together. The land's hers. I've got no legal claim to it." That seemed to surprise Raymond. "What?" "The ranch stays in Mara's name," Mara said. "Gideon has no ownership stake. So whatever you were planning, trying to use our marriage to claim the property somehow, or to suggest I'm not competent to manage it, won't work." Raymond's face went from purple to nearly white. He'd clearly been counting on the marriage giving him some kind of leverage, some legal angle he could exploit. "You can't do that. Montana law says a woman can own property in her own name even after marriage if the deed is filed correctly." "Which it is." Mara crossed her arms. "Doc Henderson helped me make sure of it. So the ranch is mine, was mine, will stay mine. You've got no claim to it, Raymond. None. Not while I'm alive." The last three words hung in the air like a threat, and Raymond's eyes narrowed. That almost sounds like you think I'd wish harm on you. I think you do whatever it takes to get what you want, but I also think you're smart enough to know that anything happening to me now would look very suspicious, especially with a husband who'd have every reason to come after anyone who hurt his wife. Gideon said nothing, but his presence beside her was solid and quietly dangerous. Raymond looked between them, clearly trying to find another angle of attack, and came up empty. "This isn't over," he said finally, the same impotent threat he'd been making for months. "Yes, it is," Mara said quietly. "Go home, Raymond. Find something else to obsess over. This ranch is lost to you." He left without another word, and Mara felt something loosen in her chest. Maybe it really was over. Maybe he'd finally accept that Iron Creek Ranch would never be his. February came in cold and clear, the kind of weather that was brutal, but at least predictable. No major storms, no disasters, just the steady grind of keeping livestock alive and buildings maintained through the worst of winter. The breeding mare's colt was thriving, growing stronger every day, showing the promise her father had gambled on. Mara spent hours watching him in the corral, this small proof that sometimes risks paid off, sometimes the impossible actually worked out. She was leaning on the fence one afternoon, the sun weak but warming on her face, when Gideon joined her. "He's going to be tall," he observed. "Good conformation, strong legs. Your father had an eye for bloodlines." "He did," she paused. "I've been thinking about expanding the breeding program. If this colt turns out as good as he looks, we could build a reputation, sell quality horses instead of just cattle." "That's ambitious. Is it a bad idea?" "No. Actually, it's smart. Horses fetch better prices than cattle if you've got the right stock, and it would diversify your income streams." He glanced at her. "Our income streams, I mean." The correction was small but significant. Our, as if the ranch's success or failure affected him equally, even though legally he had no stake in it. "You really don't want any ownership?" she asked. Most men would insist on it. "I'm not most men, and I've got my own ranch up north if I need to prove my manhood through property ownership." He smiled faintly. "Besides, this way, if you decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth, you can throw me out without a legal battle." "I'm not going to throw you out." "Good to know." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the colt explore his small world. Then Gideon spoke again, his voice careful. "Mara, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you regret it, marrying me?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, at his weathered face and steady eyes, and tried to figure out the honest answer. Did she regret it? The practical marriage, the rushed ceremony, the decision made more from necessity than desire? "No," she said finally. "It's strange, and it's not what I ever imagined for myself, but I don't regret it. Do you?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "But I wonder sometimes if you feel trapped, like you had to choose between your reputation and your freedom, and you picked the option that felt less awful." "That's not—" She stopped, because it was partly true. She had felt trapped, cornered by circumstances and gossip, and the reality of needing help she couldn't get any other way. "Maybe at first, but it's working, isn't it? We're making it work." "Working isn't the same as happy." "I'm not unhappy." "That's a low bar, Mara." She didn't know what to say to that. Happiness seemed like a luxury, something for people who weren't fighting every day just to survive. She'd been focused on holding the ranch for so long that she'd forgotten there might be more to life than just not losing. "Are you unhappy?" she asked. "No, but I wonder if we're both settling for not unhappy when we could have more." "More like what?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was soft. "Like actually being married instead of just legally bound. Like sharing a room and a life instead of just splitting chores. Like building something that matters because we want it, not just because we're too stubborn to quit." Her heart started beating faster. "We agreed this was practical, not romantic." "I know what we agreed. I'm asking if maybe we were wrong." She wanted to retreat, to hide behind the walls she'd built so carefully, but there was something in his expression that made her pause. Vulnerability, maybe, or hope, or just honesty too raw to ignore. "I don't know how to do romantic," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life being practical, being useful. I don't know how to be anything else. Neither do I. Sarah and I married young, grew up together. I've never had to learn someone new, figure out how to build something from scratch. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. But maybe we could figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure. Just see what happens if we actually try. His hand was warm, calloused from work, familiar in a way that should have been comforting but instead felt dangerous. Because trying meant risking something beyond the ranch, beyond survival. It meant risking the careful equilibrium they'd achieved. But it also meant the possibility of something more than just not unhappy. "All right," she said, "we try." Trying, it turned out, was complicated. Gideon moved into her room that night, and they lay side by side in the darkness, both stiff and awkward, neither quite sure what came next. They were married, yes, but strangers in all the ways that mattered for this particular intimacy. "This is weird," Mara said finally. "Very weird," Gideon agreed. "I haven't shared a bed with anyone since I was 6, and my mother let me sleep in her room during thunderstorms. I haven't since Sarah died." He was quiet for a moment. "She used to steal all the blankets, drove me crazy." The small detail, offered like a gift, made something in Mara's chest ache. "What else did she do that drove you crazy?" "She sang. All the time. Off-key, making up words when she forgot them. It was awful, and I loved it." His voice went rough. "Haven't heard singing in the house since she passed." Mara thought about the times Caleb had caught her singing in the garden, the embarrassed way she'd stopped when she realized she had an audience. "I sing sometimes, when I'm working alone. I know you've got a nice voice. You've heard me? A few times. You always stop when you notice someone's around." He turned toward her in the darkness. "You don't have to stop. Not for me." The conversation drifted after that, small revelations traded back and forth like currency. She learned that Gideon's mother had died when he was young, that his father had been a hard man who believed affection made children weak. He learned that Mara's mother had taught her to read before she died, that her father had been softer than people thought, prone to leaving wildflowers on his wife's grave. Eventually they fell asleep, not touching, but present, sharing space in a way that felt both strange and right. The next morning, Caleb noticed immediately. "So you're actually married now," he said over breakfast, grinning. "We were actually married before," Gideon said mildly. "Yeah, but now you're married. I heard you talking last night." Mara felt her face heat. "You were eavesdropping? The walls are thin and you're not as quiet as you think." He took a bite of biscuit. "I'm glad, though. You both seemed sad before, trying to pretend you didn't care about each other. This is better." Out of the mouths of 13-year-olds. Mara exchanged a glance with Gideon, who looked equally embarrassed and amused. "When did you get so wise?" Gideon asked his son. "I pay attention." Caleb shrugged. "Someone has to, since you adults are so bad at it." March arrived with false promises of spring. A few warm days that melted snow, followed by late storms that buried everything again. The livestock were restless, ready for grazing that wouldn't be available for weeks yet. Money was still tight but manageable, the bank payments current. The immediate crisis survived. And then the letter came. Willis delivered it personally, riding out to the ranch with an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He handed the envelope to Mara without ceremony. "From the Territorial Land Office," he said. "Came through official channels." She opened it, Gideon reading over her shoulder. The words swam at first, legal language dense and impenetrable, but the meaning became clear quickly enough. Someone had filed a claim disputing her ownership of Iron Creek Ranch. The claim alleged that Thomas Calloway's will had been improperly executed, that the property should have gone to his nearest male relative rather than his daughter, that Mara's ownership was legally questionable and should be reviewed by the territorial court. The signature at the bottom was Raymond's. "That son of a bitch," Mara said quietly. Willis shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to warn you before the official summons arrived. Raymond's been working on this for months, apparently. Got some lawyer from Helena to file the paperwork." "Does he have a case?" Gideon asked. "Maybe. Depends on how Thomas's will was written, whether there are any procedural issues. Montana law is messy when it comes to inheritance, especially for women." Willis met Mara's eyes. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you need right now." After he left, Mara sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter, feeling something cold and heavy settle in her stomach. She'd survived the winter. She'd made the payments. She'd even found something like happiness with Gideon and Caleb. And now Raymond was trying to take it all away through legal manipulation. "We'll fight it," Gideon said. "Get our own lawyer, contest the claim." "With what money? Lawyers cost more than I can afford." "Then we'll figure something out. Sell some cattle early, take a loan. I'm not taking on more debt to fight a legal battle I might lose anyway." She crumpled the letter in her fist. "Maybe I should just let him have it. Let him win. I'm so tired of fighting." "You don't mean that." "Don't I? I've been fighting since my father died. Before that even. Fighting to prove I could run this ranch, fighting to keep creditors at bay, fighting gossip and family, and everyone who wanted me to fail. And now this." She gestured at the crumpled letter. "Another fight, bigger and more expensive than all the others." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You remember what I told you when we first met? That there are two kinds of people who refuse to sell when every practical reason says they should, fools and fighters." "I remember." "You're not a fool, Mara, which means you're a fighter, and fighters don't quit just because the battle gets harder. Maybe I've been fighting the wrong battle all along. Maybe I should have sold to you when you first offered, taken the money, and started over somewhere easier. But you didn't, and you know why?" He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Because this place matters. Not just the land or the buildings or the property itself, but what it represents. Your father's legacy. Your mother's memory. Every sacrifice your family made. You can't put a price on that. And you sure as hell can't let Raymond steal it through legal tricks." She wanted to believe him, wanted to find the strength to fight one more battle, to face one more crisis, to keep pushing forward when every part of her was screaming to just give up. But she was so tired. "I don't know if I have another fight in me," she whispered. "Then let me carry some of the weight. That's what marriage means, right? Not just sharing the good parts, but holding each other up when one of us can't stand alone anymore." She looked at him. This man who'd ridden into her life as a stranger and somehow become essential, and felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, opening, letting in the possibility that maybe she didn't have to be strong all the time, that maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. "What do we do?" she asked. "First, we find a lawyer who's better than whatever hack Raymond hired. Second, we dig up every piece of documentation about your father's will and the property transfer. Third, we get testimony from people who knew Thomas, who can vouch for his intentions." He squeezed her hands. "And fourth, we show that territorial court that Mara Rowe is not someone they want to cross." "Mara Rowe," she repeated, tasting the name. She'd been thinking of herself as Calloway for so long that hearing her married name felt foreign, almost jarring, but also right somehow. "Sounds better than Mara Calloway giving up," Gideon said. Despite everything, she almost smiled. "You're annoyingly optimistic, you know that?" "Someone has to be. You're pessimistic enough for both of us." They spent the rest of the day going through every document Thomas Calloway had left behind. Deeds, bank records, correspondence, anything that might help their case. The will itself was straightforward. He'd left everything to his only surviving child, Mara. But there were questions about whether it had been properly witnessed, whether the territorial requirements had been met, whether a lawyer had been involved. Thomas had never trusted lawyers, had filed the will himself with the county clerk. That independence might now cost his daughter everything. Doc Henderson came by that evening, having heard about the legal claim through the town's efficient gossip network. He brought a bottle of whiskey and an offer to testify. "I was there when Thomas wrote his will," he said, pouring drinks for all three of them. Helped him with the wording, made sure it was clear. His intention was always for Mara to inherit. "Will the court accept your testimony?" Mara asked. "Should. I'm a respected member of the community, been here 30 years, and I can bring others, Willis from the bank, Mrs. Chen, Sam Garrett, people who knew Thomas, who understood his wishes. Raymond will have witnesses too," Gideon pointed out. "People who'll swear Thomas was senile at the end, didn't know what he was doing, intended the property to go to family." "Thomas was sharp until the day he died," Doc said firmly. "Anyone who claims otherwise is lying, and I'll say so under oath." They talked late into the night, building a strategy, identifying weaknesses in Raymond's claim. By the time Doc left, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Small and fragile, but there. The next week brought a flurry of activity. Gideon rode to Helena and came back with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wade, who had a reputation for winning difficult cases. She was expensive, but Gideon somehow convinced her to take partial payment up front and the rest contingent on winning. Mara didn't ask where the money came from. She was learning to accept help without interrogating every detail. Catherine spent 3 days at the ranch, reviewing documents, interviewing Mara and Doc Henderson and anyone else who'd known Thomas Calloway. She asked hard questions, poked holes in their story, played devil's advocate until Mara wanted to scream. "Good," Catherine said when Mara finally snapped at her. "If you can get angry defending your father's intentions, you'll do fine in court. The judge needs to see that this matters to you, that you're not just fighting for property, but for principle." "It does matter. I know. But you'll need to show it without falling apart, without letting Raymond's lawyer make you look weak or uncertain or incompetent." She fixed Mara with a stern look. "They're going to try to paint you as a woman who can't handle her father's legacy, who needed to trick a man into marriage so she'd have help running the ranch. You need to be ready for that." The words stung because they were close to what Mara had feared all along, that people would see her marriage to Gideon as proof of weakness rather than partnership. "Let them try," Gideon said quietly. "They'll find out quick enough that Mara doesn't need anyone to handle anything. She's been running this ranch since before I showed up, and she'll be running it long after this court nonsense is settled." Catherine smiled. "Good. Hold on to that attitude. You're going to need it." The court date was set for late March, which gave them 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks of gathering evidence, rehearsing testimony, worrying about every possible thing that could go wrong. And through it all, the ranch work continued. Cattle still needed feeding, fences still needed mending, the breeding mare still required care. Life didn't stop just because legal battles were being fought. Caleb proved surprisingly helpful during this time, taking on extra chores without being asked, keeping the daily routine running smoothly while Mara and Gideon dealt with lawyers and paperwork. He'd grown in the months since arriving at Iron Creek, taller, stronger, more confident, less like the quiet, grief-stricken boy who'd first ridden onto the property and more like someone who belonged. One evening, while Mara was checking on the colt, Caleb joined her at the fence. "You're going to win," he said without preamble. "I hope so." "No, you're going to win. Because you're stubborn and smart and you don't quit. And because Pa won't let you lose. He'll fight for you the same way he's fought for everything that matters to him." She looked at this boy who somehow understood more than most adults and felt her throat tighten. "When did you grow up?" "Been growing up for a while. You just started noticing." He grinned. "Besides, someone has to be the wise one around here. You and Pa are too busy being dramatic about everything." "We're not dramatic." "You're super dramatic. All the intense staring and meaningful silences and refusing to just say what you're thinking." He shook his head in mock despair. "It's exhausting watching you two." Despite her worry, Mara laughed. "You're terrible." "I'm honest. There's a difference." He turned serious again. "But really, Mara, you're going to win. And even if you don't, which you will, we're not going anywhere. This is home now, for all of us." The words settled around her like a warm blanket. Home. Not just the ranch, not just the land, but the people who occupied it. The family they'd somehow become despite starting from such practical, unromantic foundations. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For being you. For making this place feel less empty." Caleb ducked his head, embarrassed by the sentiment. "Yeah, well, you're not so bad yourself for a stepmom." He ran off before she could respond, leaving her standing at the fence with tears in her eyes and something warm expanding in her chest. The night before the court hearing, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay beside Gideon, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. What if they lost? What if Raymond won and she was forced to give up the ranch after all? What if everything they'd fought for ended up meaning nothing? "Stop thinking so loud," Gideon murmured in the darkness. "I can hear your brain working from here." "How can you be so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm just better at pretending." He rolled toward her. "But panicking won't change anything. We've done everything we can. The rest is up to the judge." "What if it's not enough?" "Then we'll deal with it, together." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "But I've got a feeling it will be. You've survived everything else thrown at you. You'll survive this too. She wanted to believe him, wanted to have his confidence, his certainty that things would work out. But all she could feel was fear. They rode into town the next morning, the three of them dressed in their best clothes, which weren't particularly good. Caleb's suit was slightly too small, bought a year ago and already outgrown. Gideon's jacket was worn at the elbows. Mara's dress was simple, practical. Nothing like the fine clothes the women from wealthier families wore. But they looked respectable, honest, like people who worked for what they had and didn't apologize for it. The courthouse was packed. Half the territory seemed to have shown up to watch the proceedings, drawn by the drama of a woman fighting her uncle for property rights. Raymond was there with his lawyer, a slick man from Helena who looked like he charged by the word. Marcus and his wife sat in the back, their expressions carefully neutral. Doc Henderson and Sam Garrett sat on Mara's side, along with Willis and Mrs. Chen and a dozen other townspeople who'd come to support her. The show of solidarity made her throat tight. The judge was a tired-looking man named Hawthorne, who'd been riding the circuit for 20 years. He called the court to order and listened to opening arguments from both sides. Raymond's lawyer painted Thomas Calloway as a failing old man who'd been manipulated by a daughter desperate to hold on to property beyond her capabilities. He suggested the will had been improperly executed, that Thomas's intentions had been unclear, that proper inheritance law should have given the property to the nearest male relative. Catherine Wade tore into that argument with surgical precision. She produced the will, properly signed and witnessed. She called Doc Henderson to testify about Thomas's mental clarity until the very end. She brought forward bank records showing Mara had been managing ranch finances for years before her father's death. And then she called Mara to the stand. The questions came fast and specific. How long had she worked the ranch? What were her qualifications? Had her father ever expressed doubt about her abilities? Mara answered each one honestly, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. She told the court about learning ranch work from childhood, about the years spent beside her father repairing fences and managing livestock. She explained his final words to her, hold the land, no matter what. Raymond's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she was emotional, that grief had clouded her judgment, that marrying quickly proved she couldn't manage alone. I married because I found a partner worth building a life with, Mara said, looking directly at the lawyer. Not because I needed someone to save me from my own incompetence. And for the record, I was managing Iron Creek Ranch successfully before my husband arrived, and I'd still be managing it successfully if he'd never come. He's here because we chose each other, not because I was desperate. Gideon's expression from his seat in the gallery was impossible to read, but his eyes were bright. The proceedings dragged on for hours. Testimony and cross-examination, documents reviewed and challenged, legal arguments that made Mara's head spin. But through it all, one thing became clear. Thomas Calloway had meant for his daughter to inherit, had taken steps to ensure it, and had never expressed doubt about her capabilities. Raymond's case rested on tradition and assumption, not facts. Finally, late in the afternoon, Judge Hawthorne called for a recess to consider his ruling. The courtroom emptied into the cold street, people clustering in groups, speculating about the outcome. Mara stood apart from everyone, too wound up to make small talk, too nervous to eat the food Mrs. Chen had brought. Gideon stayed close, not touching her but present, a steady anchor in the chaos. However this goes, she said quietly, thank you for standing with me. Always, he said simply. The court reconvened an hour later. Judge Hawthorne looked even more tired than before, but his expression was firm as he delivered his ruling. Having reviewed the evidence and heard testimony from both parties, this court finds that Thomas Calloway's will was properly executed according to territorial law. His intentions were clear and unambiguous. The property known as Iron Creek Ranch was to pass to his daughter, Mara Calloway, now Mara Rowe. The claim filed by Raymond Calloway is denied. Mrs. Rowe's ownership is confirmed and legally sound. The courtroom erupted. Doc Henderson let out a whoop. Mrs. Chen started crying. Sam Garrett clapped Gideon on the shoulder so hard he nearly knocked him over. And Mara just stood there, the words washing over her in waves. Confirmed. Legally sound. The ranch was hers, truly and finally, with no more questions or challenges or threats. She'd won. Raymond stormed out of the courtroom without a word, his lawyer following with a resigned expression. Marcus caught Mara's eye as he left, and for just a moment something like respect crossed his face. Then he was gone, following his father into the street. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps with Gideon on one side and Caleb on the other, Mara finally let herself breathe. "It's over," she said, testing the words. "It's over," Gideon confirmed. Caleb grabbed both of her hands, grinning like a fool. "Told you. Stubborn and smart and doesn't quit." They rode home through the late afternoon light, the mountains glowing gold in the distance, the valley opening up before them. The ranch came into view gradually. The house, the barn, the corrals, the flower garden just starting to show the first hints of spring growth. Home. Legally, finally, irrevocably hers. But as she dismounted and looked at the land spread out before her, Mara realized something had shifted in how she thought about it. Yes, it was hers by legal right and by her father's wishes. But it was also theirs, hers and Gideon's and Caleb's, a place they were building together, not just holding on to alone. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Mara spoke into the darkness. "I think I'm happy." Gideon turned toward her. "Yeah? Yeah. Not just not unhappy. Actually happy." She fumbled for his hand, found it. "I didn't think that was possible anymore. After my father died, after all the fighting and the debt and the fear, but it is. I'm happy." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, tucking her head against his shoulder. "Good. You deserve to be. So do you." "I am." His voice was rough with emotion. "Sarah would have liked you, I think. She'd be glad I found someone worth building a life with." The mention of his first wife should have made Mara jealous or uncomfortable, but instead it just felt right. Acknowledging the past while building the future, holding space for old love and new love simultaneously. "I wish I could have known her," Mara said. "Me too. You would have gotten along." He was quiet for a moment. "She'd be happy Caleb has you now. Happy he's not growing up with just a sad old widower for company. You're not that old. Some days I feel ancient. Join the club." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the weight of the legal battle finally lifted. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara slept without nightmares, without fear, without the crushing responsibility of holding everything together alone. Because she wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, impossibly, that had made all the difference. Spring came slowly that year, grudging and unpredictable. One day the sun would warm the ground enough to hint at thaw. The next a late storm would bury everything in fresh snow. But gradually, stubbornly, the season turned. Ice broke on the creek. The first green shoots pushed through frozen earth. The world that had seemed dead for so long started showing signs of life again. Mara watched it happen with something close to wonder. She'd survived winters before, but this one had been different. Harder in some ways, easier in others. Harder because of the debt and the legal battle and the constant fear of losing everything. Easier because she hadn't faced it alone. The breeding mare's colt was growing strong, already showing the quality bloodline her father had recognized. They'd named him Thomas, after the man who'd gambled on his mother. Every time Mara looked at the young horse, she saw proof that sometimes faith in the future paid off. Sometimes the risks were worth taking. The morning after the first real thaw, Gideon found her in the barn, running her hands over Thomas's growing frame, checking his legs and hooves with the critical eye her father had taught her. "He's going to be something special," Gideon said. "He already is." She stepped back, watching the colt explore his stall with endless curiosity. "I've been thinking about what you said, about expanding the breeding program. And I want to do it. Buy another mare with good bloodlines, maybe trade for a quality stallion. Build something that lasts beyond just surviving season to season." She met his eyes. "But that means investment, real money we don't have yet." "We've got options. My ranch up north is profitable. I could sell some stock, bring the capital down here." "That's your ranch, your money." "Mara, we're married. What's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. That's how this works." "The law says differently. Iron Creek stays in my name, remember? The law can say whatever it wants. I'm talking about what's real." He moved closer. "I didn't marry you for your land. I married you because you're stubborn and fierce and you don't quit, even when quitting would be the smart thing. And because I wanted to build something with you, not just share space or split chores. Building means investment from both of us." She wanted to argue, to maintain the careful separation between his resources and hers. But he was right. Real partnership meant more than just legal boundaries. It meant trust and risk and letting someone else have stake in the future she was building. All right, she said, we pool our resources, build the breeding program together, equal partners. Equal partners, he agreed. They shook on it, the same way they had when agreeing to marry. But this time the handshake turned into something else. His fingers threading through hers, pulling her close, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that started gentle and turned into something deeper. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara felt heat in her face and something molten in her chest. We're in a barn, she said, slightly dazed. I'm aware. Caleb could walk in. Caleb smart enough to make noise before entering a barn where his parents might be kissing. Parents. The word settled over them, significant and strange. She'd been thinking of herself as Caleb's stepmother in legal terms, but hearing Gideon say it so casually made it feel more real. They were parents now. A family, strange and unconventional as it might be. I love you, Gideon said suddenly. I know we said this was practical, that we weren't going to pretend it was something it wasn't, but somewhere along the way it became more than practical, at least for me. The words should have terrified her. Love meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to destroy you, meant all the things she'd protected herself against for so long. But looking at Gideon's face, at the honesty there, she found she wasn't afraid. I love you too, she said, testing the words. They felt foreign in her mouth, but true. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you fixed the barn roof. Maybe when you offered me the money with no strings attached. Maybe when you stood beside me in that courtroom. But somewhere in all of it, I stopped seeing this as just survival and started seeing it as life. He kissed her again, longer this time, and she let herself fall into it without fear or reservation. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling like fools. You know what this means, Gideon said. What? Caleb's going to be insufferable. He's been predicting this for months. He really has been too perceptive for his own good. Wonder where he gets it from. They found Caleb in the house, working on arithmetic problems from the books Mara had dug out of her father's collection. The boy looked up when they entered, took one look at their faces, and grinned. Finally, he said, I was starting to think you'd never figure it out. Figure what out? Mara asked, playing innocent. That you're crazy about each other. It's been obvious since Christmas. Gideon ruffled his son's hair. When did you become such an expert on romance? When I had to watch you two dance around each other for months. It was painful. He closed his book. So does this mean you're going to stop sleeping in separate rooms and pretending you're just business partners? We haven't been sleeping in separate rooms since January, Mara pointed out. Yeah, but you were still pretending it was just practical. Now you're admitting it's more. He stood, suddenly serious. I'm glad. You both deserve to be happy, and I like having a real family again instead of just me and Pa being sad together. The simple honesty of it hit Mara hard. She pulled Caleb into a hug, something she'd been hesitant to do before, unsure of her place in his life. But he hugged her back fiercely, and when they separated, his eyes were bright. You're a good kid, she said roughly. I know. You're pretty good too. For a stubborn woman who doesn't know when to quit. That's the nicest insult I've ever received. The weeks that followed felt different than anything Mara had experienced before. Not easier. The work was still brutal, the money still tight, the challenges still endless. But there was joy in it now, a sense of building towards something rather than just fighting to hold on to the past. They bought a second mare in April, a beautiful bay with excellent conformation and a pedigree that made Gideon whistle low when he saw the papers. The cost was staggering, a gamble that made Mara's stomach turn. But Gideon believed in it, and she was learning to trust his judgment. This is either going to make us or break us, she said, watching the new mare settle into the pasture beside Thomas's mother. Then we'd better make sure it makes us, Gideon said. They worked harder than ever that spring and summer, expanding the breeding operation while maintaining the cattle herd and keeping up with repairs. Caleb proved invaluable, taking on responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most boys his age. He had his father's steady competence and something of Mara's stubborn determination, a combination that served him well. In June, Thomas's mother foaled again, another colt, this one even more promising than the first. Word started spreading through the territory about the quality horses coming out of Iron Creek Ranch. Buyers began showing up, asking questions, making offers Mara wasn't ready to accept yet. Let them build, Gideon advised. Another year or two, and we can command premium prices. Rush it now, and we'll get decent money, but not what they're worth. She trusted him and held firm, turning away offers that would have seemed like fortunes a year ago. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, betting everything on future value rather than taking guaranteed money now. Sam Garrett stopped by one afternoon in July, ostensibly to look at a horse, but really to check on how they were managing. He'd become a good friend over the past year, someone who'd stood by Mara when most people were betting on her failure. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, leaning on the fence and watching the horses graze. "Your father would be proud." "You think so?" "I know so. Thomas always said this land had potential if someone would just work hard enough to unlock it. You're proving him right." Mara thought about her father, about the promises she'd made standing over his grave. Hold the land. Don't let anyone take it. She'd done that, but she'd done more too. She'd transformed the ranch from something dying into something thriving, from a burden into an asset. "I couldn't have done it alone," she said honestly. "No one does anything truly worthwhile alone. That's not weakness, Mara. That's wisdom." Sam glanced toward the house, where Gideon and Caleb were working on repairing a section of porch railing. "You found good people to build with. That's rarer than you might think." After he left, Mara stood in the yard and looked at everything they'd built. The repaired barn with its solid roof, the expanded corrals, the flower garden, now flourishing with roses and wildflowers. The house that no longer felt empty, but full of life and noise, and the messy reality of family. She'd spent so long thinking survival was the goal, that simply holding on to what her father built would be enough. But she understood now that survival wasn't living. Real living meant building something new, taking risks, letting people in even when it scared her. The legal battle had been the last gasp of people who wanted to take from her. But there was another battle she'd been fighting, the one against herself, against the fear and isolation and stubborn independence that had kept her locked in place for years. That battle was harder to win because it meant changing who she'd always been. But looking at Gideon and Caleb, at the ranch transformed from dying to thriving, she thought maybe she was finally winning it. August brought a surprise visitor. Mara was working in the garden when she heard a wagon approaching and looked up to see Marcus, Raymond's son, climbing down with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said immediately. "Then why are you here?" "To apologize, and to tell you something you should know." He shifted uncomfortably. "My father's planning to leave the territory. The court ruling broke something in him. He's selling his property and heading east, back to family in Pennsylvania." Mara waited, unsure how to feel about this news. Raymond had been a constant threat for so long that his absence seemed almost unreal. "Before he goes, though, he wanted me to tell you something, privately, because he's too proud to say it himself." Marcus met her eyes. "He's sorry. For all of it. The pressure, the legal claim, the years of trying to undermine what you were building. He was wrong, and somewhere deep down he knows it." "He sent you to tell me this?" "Not exactly. He mentioned it while drunk, and I decided you deserve to hear it even if he's too stubborn to say it directly." Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets. "For what it's worth, I thought you couldn't do it. Run this ranch alone, hold it together. I was wrong too. What you've built here is impressive." "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you started alone, and that took guts I didn't think women had." He winced at his own words. "That sounds terrible. I'm not good at apologies." Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. "No, you're really not." "Yeah, well, I'm trying. And I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family is like my father. Some of us can recognize when we've been wrong." He climbed back into his wagon. "Good luck, Mara. I mean that." She watched him leave, feeling something complicated twist in her chest. Raymond was leaving. The threat that had loomed over her for months, the family pressure that had poisoned so much, was finally ending. Not with a dramatic confrontation or satisfying revenge, but with a quiet retreat and a second-hand apology. It felt anticlimactic, but also right somehow. Not every story ended with clear villains defeated and heroes triumphant. Sometimes people just left, moved on, found other battles to fight. That evening she told Gideon about Marcus's visit. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "I don't know. Relieved, maybe? Disappointed that I don't get a more satisfying ending to that particular conflict? Life rarely gives us satisfying endings, just endings. He pulled her close on the porch where they sat watching the sunset. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't defeating Raymond or proving everyone wrong. Maybe it's just building something worth keeping, regardless of who's watching or what they think. She leaned into him, comfortable in a way that still surprised her sometimes. A year ago, she'd been alone, fighting every battle single-handedly, convinced that needing anyone was weakness. Now she couldn't imagine facing the world without this man beside her. "When did you get so philosophical?" she asked. "I've always been philosophical. You were just too stubborn to notice." "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence until Caleb appeared, demanding dinner and complaining about being starved half to death. The moment of reflection passed, replaced by the ordinary chaos of daily life. But Mara held on to it anyway, stored it away as proof that sometimes the quiet moments mattered more than the dramatic ones. Fall arrived with the kind of beauty that made the brutal winter seem almost worth it. The mountains turned gold and red, the air crisp but not yet cruel. They sold their first horses that September, 3 yearlings that brought in more money than Mara had seen in years. The buyers were impressed, promising to return, spreading word about the quality stock coming out of Iron Creek Ranch. The breeding program was working. The gamble was paying off. "We should celebrate," Gideon said when the buyers had left, and they were counting the money, still hardly believing it was real. "Celebrate how?" "Don't know. Normal people probably go to a restaurant or buy something fancy, but we're not normal people." "No," Mara agreed. "We're really not." They celebrated by fixing the last broken section of fence, by starting plans for an expanded barn, by lying in bed that night and talking about the future like it was something solid instead of theoretical. They celebrated by being themselves, by doing the work they loved, by building the life they'd chosen. It wasn't romantic in any traditional sense, but it was real and honest, and somehow more satisfying than any grand gesture could have been. Winter came again, but this time Mara faced it without fear. They had money in the bank, food stored, fuel stockpiled. More importantly, they had each other, a family built from practical decisions and stubborn persistence, and, eventually, love. The storms were still brutal, the work was still hard, but everything felt manageable now because the weight was shared. One night in January, exactly a year after their quiet wedding, Mara found Gideon in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. The lamplight cast shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes. "You getting sentimental?" he asked, catching her watching him. "Maybe. Is that allowed?" "For you? I'll allow it." He straightened, brushing hay from his pants. "What are you thinking about? How different everything is from a year ago. How much has changed?" "Good different or bad different?" "Good. Definitely good." She moved closer, taking his hand. "I was so determined to do everything alone, so convinced that needing anyone was weakness. I almost lost everything because I couldn't accept help. But you didn't lose it. You learned." "I did, though it took me longer than it should have." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say. "You saved me, you know. Not from losing the ranch. I'd probably have found some way to hold on to it even without you. But you saved me from the kind of life where holding on to something is all you ever do, where survival is the only goal and anything beyond that feels impossible." Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saved me too. From turning into the kind of man who works himself to death rather than feel anything. From raising Caleb in isolation because I was too scared to risk loving anyone again." His voice went rough. "You reminded me that fighting for something can actually win sometimes. That effort matters. That faith in the future isn't always foolish." They stood together in the quiet barn, the mare shifting in her stall nearby, the winter wind howling outside. Two people who'd started as strangers, who'd built something from practical necessity, who'd somehow found love in the most unlikely circumstances. "I'm glad you came here," Mara said. "Even though you were trying to buy my ranch and I was ready to shoot you for trespassing. I'm glad you didn't shoot me. Would have made the whole marriage thing difficult. Probably for the best." He kissed her then, gentle and familiar and perfect in its imperfection. When they pulled apart, the mare was watching them with large, placid eyes, as if blessing their union in her own quiet way. Spring came again, bringing with it new foals and new possibilities. They expanded the breeding program further, bought a third mare, started building a reputation that extended beyond the territory. Buyers came from as far as California and Texas, paying premium prices for horses with the Iron Creek brand. The ranch that everyone had said would fail was thriving. The woman everyone had pitied was happy. The practical marriage everyone had predicted would collapse had become something real and lasting. Caleb turned 15 that year, tall and confident and already showing signs of the man he'd become. He talked about staying on the ranch, about learning the business thoroughly so he could help run it when he was older. He called Mara Ma now, without thinking about it, and she'd stopped flinching at the title. They were a family, strange and imperfect and absolutely real. One evening, in late May, Mara stood in the flower garden her father had planted years ago. The roses were blooming, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, everything alive and growing. She'd maintained this garden through the hardest times, kept it alive when everything else was falling apart, because it represented something beyond survival. It represented beauty and memory, and the stubborn insistence that some things were worth preserving even when they served no practical purpose. Gideon found her there, the way he always seemed to find her when she needed company. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My father. How he'd feel about all this." "Proud, I'd imagine." "Maybe, but also surprised, I think. He never could have imagined this. The breeding program, the success, me married with a stepson. None of it would have made sense to him a few years ago." Life rarely makes sense when you're in the middle of it. Only later looking back do you see the pattern. She looked at the ranch spread out before them, the buildings solid and well-maintained, the pastures full of quality livestock, the mountains rising beyond like a promise of permanence. Everything her father had built, transformed into something new. His legacy, but also hers now. Theirs. "I used to think holding on to this place was about honoring the past," she said, "about preserving what my father built, keeping his memory alive through sheer stubbornness. And now I think it's about building the future, about taking what he gave me and making it into something bigger, something that will outlast all of us. The past matters, but it can't be the only thing that matters." Gideon nodded slowly. "Your father gave you land and taught you how to work it, but you're the one who turned it into something extraordinary. That's not just preservation, that's creation." The words settled into her like truth. She had created something here, not alone, but as the driving force. She'd taken a dying ranch and made it thrive. She'd taken a practical marriage and made it real. She'd taken fear and isolation and transformed them into strength and family. That was worth more than any legal ruling or family approval or town gossip. It was worth everything. "I'm happy," she said, the same words she'd spoken months ago. But they meant more now, carried more weight. Not just surviving or managing or getting by, actually genuinely happy. "Good," Gideon said simply. "You deserve to be." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red and purple. Behind them was the house full of life and noise and the comfortable chaos of family. Before them was the land they'd fought for, the future they were building, the possibilities that seemed endless in the fading light. Mara thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, alone, desperate, fighting to hold on to something everyone said was already lost. That woman had been strong, yes, but strength built only from fear and stubbornness had limits. It could hold a position, but never advance. It could survive, but never thrive. She understood now that real strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to accept help, when to trust others, when to let people in despite the risk. It was about building something with other people rather than protecting what you had from them. Her father had taught her to hold the land, but Gideon and Caleb had taught her to do more than hold, to build, to grow, to create something worth holding on to. That was the real lesson, the one she'd carry forward. Not that you had to be strong enough to carry every burden alone, but that sharing the weight made you stronger. Not that depending on someone was weakness, but that choosing the right people to depend on was wisdom. The ranch would outlast her, she hoped. Would pass to Caleb or his children or whoever came after, carrying forward the legacy of stubborn determination and hard work and faith in the future. But it wouldn't be the same ranch her father had built. It would be something new, something she and Gideon had created together from the foundation Thomas Calloway had laid. That felt right. That felt like honoring the past while building the future, like holding on to what mattered while letting go of what didn't. As darkness settled over the valley and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Mara turned toward the house, toward warmth and light and family, toward the life she'd built from desperation and determination and eventually love. "Come on," she said to Gideon, "let's go home." And they did, walking together through the flower garden her father had planted, past the barn they'd repaired, toward the house that had once felt empty but now overflowed with life. Behind them, the ranch settled into night, horses shifting in their stalls, cattle bedding down in the pastures, the land resting after another day of work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tasks, new possibilities. But Mara wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. She'd learned that the future was something you built, not something that happened to you. And she was good at building things, especially when she had the right people beside her. The ranch that everyone had wanted her to lose had become a legacy. The woman everyone had pitied had become strong. The practical marriage everyone had questioned had become real love. And somewhere in the Montana Valley, under endless stars and surrounded by mountains that had witnessed generations of struggle and survival and stubborn persistence, Iron Creek Ranch stood as proof that sometimes the hardest fights were worth winning, that sometimes the risks paid off, that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, the impossible actually happened. Not because of one person's strength or determination or refusal to quit, but because of people choosing to stand together, to build together, to face the future together. That was the real story, the one worth telling. Not about a woman who saved a ranch alone, but about a family who built something lasting from the ashes of loss and the foundation of hope. And years later, when travelers passed through the valley and asked about the successful horse ranch with the well-maintained buildings and the thriving stock, the locals would tell them about Mara Rowe, the woman who'd refused to quit when everyone expected her to fail, who'd turned a dying property into something extraordinary, who'd proven that strength wasn't about doing everything alone, but about choosing the right people to build with. They'd tell the story 100 different ways, adding embellishments and forgetting details, the way all stories change in the telling. But the core would remain true, that Iron Creek Ranch had been dying, and a stubborn woman had refused to let it die, that she'd fought for it, bled for it, built it into something worth fighting for, that she'd found family in unexpected places, and love in practical arrangements, and strength in finally letting people help carry the weight. That was a story worth remembering, worth passing down, worth holding on to when times got hard and quitting seemed easier than continuing. Because sometimes the impossible happened. Sometimes the fight was worth it. Sometimes building something with other people created miracles that one person alone could never achieve. And that truth, more than any legal ruling or financial success or family approval, was what made everything worthwhile.
Hope you're doing well, Sivas. Are you chilling like a villain? Oh, good to hear you're chilling. That's good. Love to hear it. Okay. So we are doing, oh my God, look at that. Isn't that looking pretty? Isn't that really nice? Oh, I love this sheen. It's so pretty. This yarn is from Hobie, if anyone's interested. It's so gorgeous to work with, I swear. One of my favorites. But yeah, we are at row 27 and we've got 13 more rows after this. Right? Isn't it gorgeous, Amu? I'll show you all the rest of them. Where are they? They are here somewhere. I promise. I just don't know where I put them. I put them somewhere and I can't remember where. I'm really having a field day, aren't I? Literally with all the things today. Don't mind me. I'm just gonna scoot over here. No, they're not there. I think you know what I think? They are, oh, they know they're in here. I was like, I know they're here somewhere.